Chapter 321, Bandit's Fear. The impressive show of force from Blazelle and the tempting power she presented to the bastard bandits effectively turned the tides of their opinion. At first, almost all of them were completely against the subordination of their group into FlareCorp. But now that they saw what Blazelle was capable of, what FlareCorp was capable of, they understood that they had no chance against them in a straight-on war. She was just the third in command, meaning there were two more powerful people above her. Yet, the bandits knew that the strange apparition of fire standing guard above her was enough to decimate them all. It threw away everything they knew about power and mana. It was the equivalent of seeing true magic in a magicless world. And what they don't understand, they fear. Blazelle was able to take control of the bastard bandits and use it as her own army. In truth, she was just here to consolidate the territories and prepare them for the arrival of FlareCorp, but nobody knew that Heste failed in his mission. Now, she had to clean up his mess, starting with the one called Reborn. She can't wait around for them to appear here in the forest. She had to strike them while they were unprepared. "Tell me everything about Reborn," she demanded. The bandit scouts told her everything the public knew about Reborn. Their expansion into Angora City and the Grafted Cluster, their strange innovative products, and most of all, their Golden Road project. "A Golden Road project?" Blazelle uttered. "Is it a coincidence or is he part of the race?" She asked herself. "It doesn't matter. It will all falter in the face of FlareCorp anyway. If they have already started their Golden Road project, then we shall destroy its reputation. By the time my cousin arrives, this southern tip must be cleansed of all things Reborn." Blazelle shouted orders at the bandits, who quickly accepted her words. Wayno, the bandit leader, could only stand around in the sidelines and watch as the bastard bandits got turned into FlareCorp's possession. Harass all travelers using the Golden Road. That ought to make them distrust Reborn. In all the years of the bastard bandits' history, they had always stayed within the protection of the forest and the fairies. It was what made them hard to get rid of. But now, Blazelle was taking out their territorial advantage and attacking Reborn in their own turf. He knew Reborn. Despite them acting as a peaceful merchant company, there were a lot of rumors about their impressive firepower. Mithril artifacts, for instance. They had a lot under their sleeves, and they wouldn't simply just stand around while their territories got attacked. Case in point, he knew Sleazy had gone off on his own and tried to attack Reborn. And he ended up disappearing from the face of the earth. Things could end up the same as that. Michael transported himself to the truck stop in the Golden Road right in front of McTony's. When it first opened up, the restaurant saw no more than 50 people a day. For Tony and Remy, this many customers was already well above what they had back in their rundown little restaurant near the slums of Angora City. They were already quite satisfied if this were to continue day in and day out. But just after a week of its opening, they saw their numbers jump up to almost 100 customers. The fact that McTony's was located in the middle of nowhere made this even more impressive since there was less foot traffic here. Michael visited on the peak hour, just after the sun had set. Travelers and merchants used this truck stop to camp and sleep in for the night. And when they saw a restaurant open, they decided to eat in before going to bed. So, the restaurant capacity of 50 seats was nearly filled, with just a few vacant positions left. Michael walked in and saw Tony and his kitchen staff hard at work, tossing pans with a raging fire almost reaching to their heads. Even when they used spells like cook evenly and automatic stir to make work more efficient, it seemed like it still wasn't enough. "Excuse me, I'd like to order a McTony's," one of the customers on the counter shouted, trying to get the chef's attention. Just then, he saw a small boy use a small stool to reach eye level with him. "All right, sir," Remy adorably said. "I'm sorry, but you will have to wait 15 minutes for your order. Is that all right?" The man wanted to complain, but saw how much the chefs were working hard to fulfill orders. He also didn't want to be the guy to lecture a little kid, so he just nodded and waited like the other customers. He consoled himself with the fact that McTony's chicken was worth the wait. "A lot of customers today, huh?" Michael approached the counter, with Tony and the Rebornian chefs greeting him with a strained smile. "Michael, you couldn't have come at a worse time," Tony said. juggling 2 pans of chicken in his hands at the same time. I can't believe it, but this is the first time that the restaurant has been filled to capacity. I know I should be happy, but this is stressful, haha. Despite his complaints, Tony saw joy in his work. For the first time, he saw how much people loved his chicken. Any problems with the ingredients? Michael asked the Rebornian chefs assisting Tony. Not yet, boss. We still have a lot of chickens in our freezer, and we have more coming in tomorrow delivered from Barkus Chicken Farms. However, we didn't expect the customers to increase this much. Our stock of dragon's whiskers is getting low. Michael had Tony and the other chefs coordinate with all the merchants in the Kings and Queens region for any dragon's whiskers that they had in store. When the store first started, the stock lasted well enough. But now that their restaurant had filled capacity for the first time, it seemed that they would need a lot more than that to satisfy demand. The chefs gave Michael some paperwork that graphed the rapidly increasing customer base of McTony's. According to their projections, this wouldn't be the first night where they would get this much customer in the peak hours of the afternoon. I'll have Shiina contact some of the adventurer guilds in the Queen's region and formally issue a mission for Dragon's Whiskers. With the extravagant fee they posted, their stock of Dragon's Whiskers would at least be able to give them a stock for a few months. Just then, the restaurant door opened and a group of customers entered inside. The excitement was clear on their faces. Anyone could tell that they were returning customers of McTony's. However, the smile on their faces soon turned into disappointment when they realized that the restaurant was filled with people. There were no more seats left for them. Ah, damn. Guess we'll have to come back another day. Michael heard this and turned to Remy. Are they always leaving like that? They don't have any places to sit, answered innocently. It was then that Michael remembered an important aspect of fast food restaurants. Takeout. But it was in that exact moment that Michael saw a shadow emerge from his feet. Chapter 322. Questions for Blazel. Michael moved to a more private location. Once he was alone, shadows from the corner appeared in front of him and turned into the shadow orcs. He thought it was just a routine report, but he was surprised to see 3 orcs appear in front of him. It was Naruto, Sasuke, and another orc whose shadow robe outfit didn't seem to be in good shape. Most of the silk material had been burned away, leaving holes all around his uniform. What happened to him? Michael asked immediately. The prospect of a Rebornian getting hurt without his knowledge was something that immediately tugged at his attention. Using his supreme talent, he scanned the orc's light mana, seeing if there was any danger to his life. Thankfully, though, aside from a few burn marks in the skin that was already halfway healed, the orc was in relatively good shape. However, the fact that he was even hurt in the first place was a little bit worrying. Aside from the fact that his lesser unity defense was broken through, a shadow orc should have all the tools he needed to escape untouched if he wanted to. Meaning, this shouldn't have happened. The 2 shadow orc chieftains kneeled in front of Michael and apologized. Bu-Tutu. It is with our greatest dishonor to report that we have failed in our mission. Even our elite shadow force were not able to infiltrate our enemies, Naruto said, slapping his breast muscles harshly. Tell him what happened, he instructed the shadow orc. The injured orc bowed to Michael. Bu-Tutu. The task that my superiors had assigned to me was to closely monitor the actions of Blazel, the third in command of Flare Corp. He began to describe in detail everything that the orc shadows had seen just a few hours ago. He told Michael about the meeting with the bastard bandits and her failed attempt at gaining control over their group. It was only when she became angry did she unleash a power so great that even we cannot withstand it. I was attached to her shadow, so the power I felt was even more amplified than normal. My lesser unity defense tried to protect me from the flames, but was unable to withstand its strange power. There were flames, yet it was not made out of fire mana. I had to make a split decision. In the end, I chose to retreat all shadows from the bastard bandit hideout in fear of getting discovered. It is my failure that I was unable to gather more information about Blazel and her strange power. The shadow orc kneeled and waited for punishment. Yet it did not come. Michael heaved a sigh of relief. It doesn't matter. As long as you are all well and good, then the mission doesn't matter. Your lives are more important than anything else, he reminded them. But Tutu, we are grateful. Ratata. I am even more grateful. Michael didn't even consider it as a failed mission. After all, Blazel was the third in command of the entire Flarecorp army. Of course she was strong. The fact that they could escape out of there unscathed and without Blazel even knowing about their existence already spoke to how competent they were at their jobs. However, from the Shadow Orc's description, Blazel's power didn't seem to come from her magic at all. It was something else entirely that even his lesser Unity defense could not counter. What exactly did you see? Michael felt his intuition going off. There was something familiar and unfamiliar about Blazel's power. I was only able to take a glimpse from afar, the Shadow Orc answered. A figure made out of flames appeared hovering above her. It looked surreal. It cast no shadow and it didn't get illuminated by the oil lamps around it. And most of all, it had no presence of mana at all. Nothing. Michael felt his heart pumping loudly. He looked down at his chest and felt it with his hands. This wasn't just a normal heartbeat. It was the Godforge piece trying to tell him something. The thought had already crossed Michael's mind, yet he just couldn't believe it yet. There were too many unknowns. However, his intuition was telling him, Blazel had a Godforge piece of her own. And not only that, but she was also able to summon her own apparition. A whole plethora of questions appeared in Michael's thoughts. Was this normal? Were all Godforge piece owners capable of summoning their own apparition? Did they meet with the metallic woman as well? These questions appeared on Michael's mind, yet he was incapable of answering them. But there was one thing for sure. This is the secret of the Godforge pieces, Michael realized. This is why the corporations who hoard Godforge pieces distribute them to their heirs and successors. The power held in these supernatural metal materials was something that could bypass any and all sorts of magical spells or defense. It was something that defied all logic, needing no mana at all to show a tremendous force of power. Our Shadow Orcs have also heard chatter from the bandits that went outside. They are planning on attacking the Golden Road and all its travelers as a way to discredit us, Naruto reported. Although Michael wasn't a fan of violence, he wouldn't back down from a fight, especially if he already had a reason to confront her. If Blazel was planning on attacking them, then he would finally have an excuse to fight against her. And whether she wanted to or not, he will find a way to make her answer everything she knew about the Godforge pieces. He was only able to summon the metallic apparition through the use of his Unity gun, which was a combination of a mystical and physical art spell that utilized the Unity mana. However, Blazel and presumably others were able to find a way to bypass that and summon their own apparition even if they could not wield Unity mana. All of his questions could only be answered by someone like her. Summon the Dragonborns, he said to the Orcupine chieftain. If they want to fight on our turf, then we'll give them what they want.
Rahtata.
Sasuke roared in excitement. We shall have our high shadows and mid shadows lure the bandits to a secure location. Naruto, go to the nation of Reborn and bring out the bandit prisoners. Tell the centaur guards that this is urgent. They will know what to do. Be you Tutu, Naruto shouted back. I shall not disappoint you. Now, the elite Shadow Orc was the only one that remained. Are you injured? Michael asked him. No, boss. Please let me participate in this and allow me to redeem myself. The Orcanine Orc's ears were practically drooped down. Once he thought Michael wasn't going to assign him a mission. Michael couldn't really deny the guy after seeing the eagerness in his eyes. And since he didn't have any serious injuries, Michael relented. Go to Neo Orcus and seek out Beth in the chocolate factory. Tell her that I'll meet with her soon to talk about our products. Chapter 323. Concentrated. Michael transported himself near the forest of Neo Orcus. There, he saw a large factory building with white smoke rising from the chimneys. The scent of a rich and sweet mixture wafted over his nose, the smell of chocolates. This was the chocolate factory where they turned the native cacao seeds into delectable sweet snacks that everybody seemed to enjoy. Chocolates was actually one of the most sold products in Reborn. Not only was it loved by the general public, but its public perception as an energy booster helped it become a mandatory snack for the knights and other fighting-related jobs. Even adventurers used it as their sustenance whenever they were off on missions for long periods of time. But because of its demand, there were some troublemakers who wanted to get it directly from source. But of course, the factory was tightly guarded, with Rebornians positioned all around the walls surrounding the building. There were watchtowers pointing lights all over the corners, making sure there was no one there plotting to rob the place. The guards bowed as he walked inside the building. Inside, he saw Rebornians garbed in white safety coats and glasses. After all, processing chocolates needed a lot of heat and steam, which can create a lot of accidents. Michael walked past conveyor belts with a worker magically using the mechanical spouts to pour perfectly portioned liquid chocolate into a mold. This would then get transferred over to the next machine, where it would get cooled and packaged by a Rebornian into a wrap. The workers bowed and gave Michael a smile as he walked past them. Since he already announced his arrival, the guards guided him to the top floor where the offices were located. Michael knocked on the door and opened it, seeing Beth in her baking attire with oven mitts in her hand. She had just finished cooking a batch of cookie chocolates. Even though this was an office, Beth had it retrofitted to become a bakery where she could experiment with new recipes to sell. "Michael, it's great to see you. Come have a try of this," she said, giving Michael a freshly baked chocolate chip cookie. He tasted it and knew that her skills had improved since the last time he saw her. "This is good, but this is not actually what I came here for," he said to her. "I'm here for the concentrated chocolates." Beth nodded and immediately walked over to her cabinet to take out a metal box containing 5 separate chocolate bars. Each bar turned darker from left to right. "Just as you have ordered, we have been doing experiments to make the chocolate more concentrated than the last," she said, bringing up the lightest colored bar on the box. "This is our normal chocolates, the one we sell to the general public. It contains 25% cacao concentration." Michael nodded. This was the normal amount of cacao that they sold everywhere. According to their research, it was in this concentration where it was chocolatey with not much bitterness to consume. But for Rebornians, it was a whole new different story. After all, Michael gave them all a skill called Sugar Rush, allowing them to increase their mana efficiency, mana consumption, mana power, and everything else upon consumption of a chocolate bar. Right now, the 25% cacao chocolate allowed each Rebornian to increase their power by 1-star realm. If they were 3-star magicians, they would turn into 4-star magicians upon consumption. Michael still wasn't satisfied with this, however. He wanted to see what would happen if they increased the concentration of the cacao chocolates to the Sugar Rush skill. The first result was disappointing. Just putting more cacaos into the recipe only resulted in a very marginal increase in strength. Thankfully, though, after many iterations and experiments from Beth and the rest of the talented bakers in the factory, they were able to make their first breakthrough. By compressing chocolates into a much denser material, while still adding in more ingredients, they were able to create a 35% cacao concentration chocolate. It still wasn't enough to improve power by 2-star realms, but it was enough to almost reach it by just a hair. "This is our very best chocolates," Beth said as she showed Michael the darkest chocolate bar with the number 35% stamped on top of it. "How much do we have right now?" he asked her. "We have about 5,000 in stock, and we can rush production for another 1,000 today if we shut down all normal chocolate production." "That's enough for now," Michael said, pocketing the chocolate in his inventory. "Can you make more in the future? The problem is with our current stock of cacaos. Creating the 35% concentrated chocolate needs about twice the amount of cacao needed for a normal chocolate. And the sacred trees of the orcs are only limited in amount. If we were to focus on the production of concentrated chocolate, we won't have enough to satisfy the demand of our customers." Although the sacred cacao trees from the orc tribes were numerous, it was still limited. And the cacao trees that were planted back in the nation of Reborn still wouldn't mature for another few years before it was able to bear fruit. "I'll ask, and if she could plant more cacao trees back in the parched lands, so that we won't have this problem in the future," he said, making a mental note. "I'll have the shadow orcs come and pick up the 35% chocolates to distribute among our forces. Thanks for your help, Beth." "No problem, Michael. Come by if you want some freshly baked cookies." Meanwhile, the bastard bandits had set off from the safety of their forest and ventured into Reborn's territory. They stalked the golden road deep into the night, hoping to catch straddlers that were easy prey. However, they were horrified to find out that each of those automobiles could ride faster than even an arrow. They zoomed through the flat roads, leaving the bandits unable to catch up to them with their horses. Eventually, one of their scouts came back from Angora City. The man had been walking into taverns and trying to find more information about Reborn and the Golden Road. It didn't take long before the conversation ended up at the truck stop. "Truck stop?" the bandits questioned. "Is that a new town?" The scout clearly didn't know as well. "It doesn't matter what it is. What's more important is that they are property of Reborn in the Golden Road. I heard there's a lot of people going there and camping to sleep." With no luck robbing the people driving in the roads, the bandits decided to travel to this so-called truck stop for days on end. It took them a while, but they finally reached their destination. And there, they saw a bustling community of automobiles and people alike. Cars were going in and out of the truck stop, with most parking their cars on the designated spots and leaving to enter an establishment on the side. "McTony's," the bandits muttered to themselves. There were a lot of people inside. A lot. And they were just there like sitting ducks, ready to be robbed. With a silent nod, the bandits approached the busy building. Chapter 324. Restaurant Hostage. Once Michael had everything prepared, he returned back to McTony's to settle his unfinished business. Specifically, he wanted to talk to Tony and the others about customers being able to take out their order and eat it on the go. He appeared once again during the night, at the peak hours of the restaurant. Tony, Remy, and all the chefs were busy serving out chicken after chicken without any pause. But at least now, they seemed prepared to handle this many customers. After that day when they reached full capacity of customers, the next several days continued to be like that as well, giving them time to adjust to the workload. Michael looked out the counter and still saw some people entering the restaurant and leaving disappointed once they saw they had no seat left to sit in. "We need to talk about ordering takeout," Michael said. "There's a lot of wasted business once people leave without being able to eat a single thing." Tony was able to find some downtime as the chicken cooked in the pan. "Takeout? What's that?" But before Michael could say anything to him, a shadow emerged in front of him, with an orc appearing right in the middle of the kitchen floor. "Boss," the Orcanine orc said, kneeling. "The bandits have finally reached this part of the Golden Road. They are currently targeting this restaurant as we speak." That finally got Tony's attention. "Bandits? They're coming here?" Michael waved off Tony's concerns. "We have it under control," he said nonchalantly. "As I was saying, I think it's time we implement a takeout system for customers that can't sit inside the restaurant. I'll have some Rebornians create takeout boxes." "What are you talking about right now? Don't we have to worry about the bandits?" It was at that moment when the door to the restaurant was busted wide open, with a bunch of roughly dressed individuals walking inside with swagger in their steps. They did nothing to hide the sharp weapons holstered in their waists and even proudly displayed it to everyone who wanted to see. The customers frowned at the entrance of these new people. The fact that they didn't line up at the counter to take their order meant that they were not here for the chicken. They were here for something else entirely. The 10 or so bandits spread themselves around the restaurant, covering every corner, window, and exit. They leaned into these escape routes casually, but it was clear that they would not hesitate to resort to violence if one wanted to get past them. The bandit with the bandana on his forehead walked on top of a table, never minding the fact that there was still chicken on the plate. "Okay, don't panic, people. This is a robbery," he announced. The customers all froze in their seats as the other bandits reached out for their knives and presented its sharp blades to the crowd. "Don't move from your seats if you don't want something bad to happen. If you try to run, we have more people waiting outside," he said, pointing his knife at the windows showing more bandits leaning on the glass. "Just do as I say, and no one gets hurt, understand?" The customers had no other choice but to nod their heads and comply with the bandits. Meanwhile, Tony was able to witness as the bandits took the entire restaurant hostage. The whole place was surrounded by bandits. "Oh no, Remy, hide," Tony said to his son, who was hiding behind his legs. "Michael, just please ensure that my son is safe from them." The dogfolk assistant chef approached Tony with a reassuring smile. "There's no need to worry, Tony. You're a new Rebornian, so you don't understand. But the safest place in the entire world is right next to where our boss is. There's nothing to worry about." Tony looked at all of them and saw no sign of distress in their faces. The Rebornian chefs continued to cook chicken as if nothing was happening, and Michael was still talking about the takeout system even during this entire situation. "We have been preparing for their arrival for a few days now," explained the Shadow Orc. "This is within our estimations. And besides," Michael said, pointing at the two particular customers sitting at the tables, "I have someone there that I trust completely. They'll take care of it. Now, let's talk about the takeout wrappers." Tony didn't know if he should be awed or worried at Michael's nonchalance to the whole situation. Back to the hostage situation in the restaurant, the bandana bandit silently signaled the other bandits to take out their large rucksack bags. "I want everybody to take out all your jewelry, your coin pouches, and everything valuable on your bodies. Set them down at your table and put your heads down. If you do, then our bandits will not attack you as we collect the money." There was no hesitation for some customers. They hurriedly took out their coin pouches and put it on the table, with its hefty catching ringing out on the table. These were the people who valued their lives more than some gold coins. But for other people, they were less than inclined to give up their life savings to the bandits. To quell any ideas of rebellion, the bandana bandit stabbed his knife on the table, just missing the reluctant man's hands. At that point, everybody was convinced to give up their possessions in exchange for their safety. "Okay, put your heads down," the bandit commanded. Everyone did. They buried their heads on the table and hoped that this whole thing would be over fast. The bandits began collecting all the jewelry and valuables on the table. However, it was only now in the silence of the room did the bandits notice that there was a table who didn't comply with their rules. Two people were sitting facing a wall, with their heads still clearly up, and with no valuables on the table. Not only that, but the two of them had the audacity to continue eating fried chicken without a single care in the world. This is so good, bro. I can't believe bro Mike has been hiding this restaurant from us. Yeah, I want this every day." The bandits looked at the two demi-humans and didn't recognize their species. Their bodies were full of scales like a snake, yet their heads were more like that of a lizard than anything else. "Didn't you hear what I said?" questioned the bandana bandit, brandishing his knife near the dark blue-scaled demi-human's neck. "Lower your heads or I'll cut your necks." But in response to that threat, the two of them kept munching on their fried chickens as if the bandit was even less than wind. In the silence, the crunch of the chicken resounded out through the restaurant, confusing all the bandits. These people must be wrong in the head for acting like this in a robbery. "I want to finish this quickly so that I can order one again," said Zion, wiping his mouth filled with sauce. "All right," Jaku replied while stretching. "I'll take this first one, you do the others." The bandana bandit finally had enough. "I warned you," he shouted, thrusting his knife towards Jaku. Chapter 325, Hole in the Wall Restaurant. The 4-star spell, Thunderous Burglary, erupted within the knife, creating yellow electricity that surrounded the very blade itself. With the speed of thunder, the knife reached Jaku's side in a matter of milliseconds. Clink! A sword coming from below Jaku's elbow parried the knife, preventing the blade from going any further. The bandit's eyes widened as he looked at Jaku, who was suddenly wielding a sword out of nowhere. The bandit didn't even see him have a sword in the first place. Not only that, but with the very short distance it had to travel, the bandit thought his knife would surely pierce through the demi-human scales. The worst part was that Jaku hadn't even turned around yet. He was still taking his last bite of the chicken in his hands, with the sword just positioned on his side near his elbow. "TSK. Impressive. But that exchange alone let me know you're just a 3-star swordsman." "That's not good enough." The bandana bandit retreated his thunderous knife. His feet and arms began to emit electricity as well, giving him a boost in both speed and power. He thrusted his knife to Jaku's shoulder, but the Dragonborn finally turned around and deflected off the knife with the flat side of his blade. The thunderous knife slid and thrusted into the wooden table. The whole structure exploded into a million charred splinters as electricity coursed through it from the knife. Jaku got up off his seat and faced the bandana bandit, who smiled and flipped his knife in the air. As a piece of wood fell from the ceiling and hit the ground, the bandit rushed to Jaku with bloodshot eyes. He thrusted the knife to Jaku's stomach, with the Dragonborn parrying it with an upward swing. The bandit moved closer, using the close quarters combat to his advantage. His knife was very easy to maneuver, allowing him to create a relentless flurry of thrusts. Each strike was parried by Jaku, with the clashing of their blades creating sparks that flew around the restaurant. The bandit's unrelenting flurry of attacks forced Jaku to continue to move backwards. Each of the bandit's thrusts allowed him to take one step closer to Jaku until the Dragonborn was standing behind a table of innocent bystanders. He stepped in and pushed his knife to Jaku's neck, parried only by Jaku with his downward swing. The bandit rushed again, intending to hit Jaku's left ribs. If the Dragonborn dodged this, the knife would slip past him and hit the innocent people sitting at the table behind him. So instead, Jaku used the flat of his blade to stop the knife dead in its tracks, perfectly keeping it in place and creating a pause in the fight. The bandit used this opportunity to rush his knife before Jaku could reposition his sword, intending to cut his elbow. Yet, at the very last second, Jaku's sword erupted in a blue lightning, creating an illusion as if two swords had appeared in front of Jaku and deflected the knife before it hit him. The bandit's eyes widened. Jaku's entire body was now surrounded by blue lightning, similar to the bandana bandit's body-enhancing spell. Just then, a blur flashed past the bandit's eyes and he subconsciously raised his knife, barely knocking Jaku's swing off course and saving himself from a much deeper cut in his chest. Blood stained the bandit's outer garment from the surface-level injury. The bandit looked down at his chest plate and saw a small cut in the middle of the metal. If it weren't for this, he would have suffered a much deeper injury. You're faster than me. I'm 1-star realm above you. The bandana bandit shouted in disbelief. Who are you? You attacked us, and you don't know who you're fighting against? I know I'm lazy, but that's even lazier. Jaku put his sword on his shoulder and disappointedly shook his head. The bandit's eyes widened as he finally remembered the rumors. There were talks about the famous fighters of the Reborn Company, the people who defeated the Stone Cold Six, the Dragonborns. You're the Dragonborn? Jaku nodded. The bandana bandit gritted his teeth and gripped his knife tighter. It doesn't matter who you are when there's 10 of us. 5 bandits thrusted their swords behind Jaku. The Dragonborn's body erupted in a blue lightning, allowing his speed to reach even faster limits. From their perspective, he seemed to have disappeared from their sights, leaving the bandits to crash into one another. Massaging their heads, the bandits looked up and searched for Jaku. They looked up and finally saw him on the other side of the restaurant. The dark blue-scaled Dragonborn took out a freshly cooked chicken from the counter and pinched a small piece before eating it in one go. The bandits were shocked at the audacity. Get back here! The bandana bandit shouted, empowering his knife with a thunderous quality. His body almost turned into a blur as he lunged towards Jaku. Clink! At the moment of impact, the bandit remained still. Slowly, he raised his head and looked at the blade on his knife. It had been shattered into a million pieces on the ground. How? Jaku didn't let the bandit recover and hit him in the head with the flat part of his blade, knocking him out cold. Then, he disappeared into a blue lightning bolt again before reappearing right in front of the 5 bandits. Flustered, they tried to overwhelm him with attacks from all different sides. And for a brief moment, Jaku's body blurred into 5 different bodies, with each one hitting a bandit's knife and deflecting their flurry of blows. Slowly, the bandits felt their knives chipping and cracking with each blow against Jaku's sword. At this point, they slowly retreated and stopped attacking him. Yet it was already too late. Their knives had shattered into useless metal scrap. Before they could even react, They saw a blue blur before a blade slapped them in their heads, knocking them out cold instantly. Ha ha ha! Boom! This is fun! On the other side of the restaurant, Zion had been toying with his bandit targets. The red-scaled dragonborn had been weaving left and right as all 4 bandits thrusted their knives at him. Despite the reckless action from the youngster, none of the blades were able to reach his scales. This was the perfect opportunity for him to practice the Dempsey roll skill that Michael imparted onto him. Ha ha! What the hell is up with this kid? The bandits' attacks became ever more sluggish as they felt exhaustion creeping up on them. They had been at this for a full minute, yet they couldn't get a hit on Zion. Oops, Jaka said as he looked at the other side of the restaurant. Bro, Jaka's done with his practice. Time for me to finish this, he said. As the exhausted bandit thrusted his knife at him, Zion ducked down and performed a swift uppercut to the wrist, disarming the man. And with a left-right 1-2 combo, he disarmed the rest of the bandits around him, with their knives haphazardly flying off into the ceiling. Befuddled, the bandits were left defenseless as Zion prepared his final move. Spacebreaker punch! He shouted as his dark violet gauntlets began to glow a purple light. Space itself began to crack around his fists, propagating further as Zion gathered power around his gauntlets. I told him to not overdo it, Jaka muttered in a disappointed voice, watching from the sidelines. His body erupted in blue electricity again as he teleported himself to the innocent civilians that were about to be caught up in a massive explosion. Zion didn't even seem to care as he finally unleashed the power of his punch, with all 4 bandits being caught up in the propagation of the cracks in space. The Dragonborn's gauntlet hit the first bandit squarely in his stomach, launching him forward, and somehow the 3 other bandits seemed to have been caught in the force, feeling as if a big boulder had hit them like a meteor. They shot off into the walls, destroying the tables and chairs that were in the way. They then burst through the glass windows, skidding an extra 50 meters outside before stopping on the ground. Chapter 326. Backup v Backup. Tony looked through the window with his jaw dropped to the ground. The power those 2 dragonborns showed was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was 10 against 2 with all the bandits in the 4-star realm. Yet, they were swiftly and decisively defeated by 2 demi-humans who were only in the 3-star realm. Even though he was just a chef, Tony knew how impossible this all seemed. The dragonborns didn't even break a sweat. Michael, yeah. Zion was a bit too careless with his punches. The restaurant is a mess, Michael said, looking at a large hole in the wall filled with rubble and glass shards. Not only that, but there were about 3 tables and 6 chairs that were completely destroyed, lowering the capacity for the restaurant. TSK. We warned him about this. Now, Shiina will be forced to lower his chicken allotment for the week, Michael said disappointedly. They defeated those bandits, Tony shouted. How did they even do that? That's just normal, one of the Rebornian chefs said. And upon hearing this, the little Remy couldn't help but gleam an excited smile. Really? Then does that mean I can be as cool as those big brothers? Michael nodded. Of course. Then I'll be an ass-kicking chef in the future. I'll not only serve a juicy fried chicken, but also a swift kick of justice, Remy proclaimed, with stars almost forming in his eyes. Oh, how cute, little Remy. Ho ho, quite an exciting chef you'll be in the future. We're looking forward to it. Little Remy, worry about that after you don't forget about plucking all the feathers in the chicken. Okay? The Rebornian chefs all coddled and praised the little boy for his ambitions. Seeing this, Tony couldn't help but slap his own forehead. It seemed that he was the only person in this room who knew how difficult it was to be able to defeat multiple vicious bandits 1-star realm higher than you. Son. Just as Tony was about to tell his son about the harsh reality of something called talent, Michael signaled for him to stop talking. Let him have his dream, Michael said. Who knows, maybe he will become what he says in the future. Since the little Remy was still 9 years old, Michael didn't know how talented the boy could become. So, he didn't want Tony to influence Remy by saying that he might not have the talent to become as powerful as the Dragonborns. After all, Michael had realized that perception and self-belief could play a part in the development of talent. For example, the red hobmonkeys evolved the exact same way that Michael wanted them to evolve once he told them about their new jobs. If it could work in the evolution of demi-humans, then it could possibly work in the talent awakening of a human. Maybe I should focus on the education department of Reborn. ChatJK 4, make a note. Understood. Making a mental reminder. Michael, I see more bandits out there. They did say that they have the whole place surrounded. There's more outside. Tony looked through the windows again and peeked through the giant hole in the restaurant. There was a gathering of about 30 or so raggedly dressed men looking down at the 4 knocked-out bandits. They all took out knives from their waists, wielding it with caution as they looked through the restaurant in search of the one who defeated their comrades. Don't worry, we have more people outside, Michael said. The 30 or so bandits stared at the restaurant with more caution. The fact that they were able to defeat the bandana bandit leader and the 9 other bandits meant that they were dealing with a much more difficult situation than expected. Hey, what happened over there? The bandit said as he slapped the unconscious man on the ground. Unfortunately, he was totally knocked out. If he wasn't, he could have warned them to retreat now before they faced those dragonborns. TSK, are they slacking off? How dare they get knocked out by a bunch of civilians? One of the bandits said. How embarrassing of them. Let's teach these civilians a hard lesson. We'll storm the restaurant together. On 3 we go. 1, 2, Techari. Before he could finish his sentence, the bandit suddenly felt something tugging at his feet, causing him to fall forwards. Ow! What the? He looked at his lower body and saw a shadow wrapped itself around his shins. Then, his eyes naturally saw a large, intimidating orc standing behind him. It had a great furry mane around its neck, with its muscles even bigger than his head. He couldn't even understand where the orc had come from. Anyone among them should have sensed the approach of such a big creature like him. Yet when he looked at the other bandits, he realized he wasn't the only one. He saw them struggling to break free from the shadows that wrapped themselves around them. Some had their arms forcefully strapped to their backs. Some had their legs almost sinking to the ground, and some had almost their entire bodies coated with a dark black material. Arg! What's happening? What are these? Get this away from me! Following the direction of these shadows, the bandits saw an entire horde of orcs standing menacingly behind. Who are you? The bandits screamed at the orcs. Yet, they continued to stand still, not moving an inch and remaining completely silent. It was then that the silence of the night was disrupted by the sounds of multiple hooves crashing on the ground. The disturbance propagated through the earth, causing the bandits to look towards its source. And there, riding in the distance, they saw 10 centaurs rushing at top speeds and leaving behind a cloud of dust behind them. They held humongous lances to the side, ready to skewer the bandits. As they came closer and closer, the centaurs didn't slow down their approach. They rushed even faster, with the very tip of their lances aimed directly at the trapped bandits. Their lances glowed with tremendous red power as the ground beneath their hooves quaked in fear. And as they reached their target, a large explosion erupted from the point of collision. The crash sent the bandits flying off into the air in different directions. The 15 or so unfortunate bandits that took the brunt of the force were immediately incapacitated, with most of their bones broken from the impact and only further exacerbated once they landed harshly on the ground. The other 15 bandits didn't come out unscathed, however. Their small knives were unable to deflect against such a large course of impact, so they were still injured from the initial explosion, with most sustaining broken bones and internal injuries. Yet, they were able to pick themselves back up after landing on the hard concrete ground. Where did they come from? One of the surviving bandits muttered with strained breaths. Blood flowed from his injured forehead. Retreat! He shouted to the other surviving bandits. But before any of them could move, red mankeys rushed behind them and knocked them out with one swift hit in the neck. Chapter 327. Meeting a Reformed Bandit. After the bandits were taken care of, Michael came out of the kitchen to assure the customers that this type of thing wouldn't happen again. But surprisingly, Instead of being angry that their dining experience was ruined by the bandits, the customers began approaching the Dragonborns and giving them praise. They were impressed by their swift removal of the bandits, even at the cost of some property destruction. Hee, of course. That's just what I do on the regular, Zion boasted, scratching his nose. Jaka hit his younger brother on the head with his sheath. Idiot. You created a hole in the restaurant. Ow! The red-scaled Dragonborn glared at his older brother. What's the big deal? We'll rebuild it anyway. TSK. It's not the rebuilding that I'm worried about. What do you think will happen to this restaurant once it's under construction? You think they'll still sell chicken? The realization came to pass in Zion's mind like a truck. He held his heart in pain, probably in more pain than what the bandits could have done. Oh no! I've made a terrible mistake. Don't close down the store. Let's just leave it like this. Thankfully, Shiina wasn't here, or else the two of them would have gotten the screaming of a lifetime. Who are these guys again? One of the customers whispered as they looked at Zion and Jaku. They're the Dragonborns, another answered. I thought they weren't real. The rumors were true then, that they could defeat people 1-star realm higher than their own. And did you see those centaurs outside? If they're protecting the Golden Road, then I'll feel safe traveling here. As it turned out, this kind of hostage/robbery situation was normal in this world, especially in the middle of nowhere like this truck stop was located at. Traveling out in the wilderness were usually accompanied with encounters with bandits and monsters. It was normal to fight off either one of them at least once every 3 days of travel time. And in the entire time they used the Golden Road, this was the only instance where they felt any danger at all. That was the reason why they weren't at all fazed by the bandits, and continued to eat their chickens after everything was over. Chef, another order of chicken? One of the customers said, walking around one of the bandits unconscious on the floor as he approached the counter. Michael tapped Tony's shoulder. See that? They're asking for more chicken. Tony absent-mindedly nodded. He was still not over everything that happened tonight. He was the only one reacting normally while everyone was already too jaded. Don't worry. The bandits are all taken care of, Michael said just as the centaurs picked up every bandit and gathered them into one big circle. But what if they come again? That's why I asked the centaurs to come here for support. You can count on them for security. One of the centaurs approached the kitchen area, ducking down the door as he entered. Boss, we have all the bandits captured. Good job, Michael praised them. I was just talking to Tony about your new positions here. I want you to work with the Red Hobmankeys to patrol the Golden Road and prevent something like this from happening again. Michael also asked the leader of the Hobmankeys to enter the conversation, formally introducing the two demi-humans who would one day become the highway patrols of the Golden Road. Your two groups will work in tandem. Centaurs don't have any problem with being ridden like a horse, right? The centaur bowed his head. We will do anything to protect Reborn. Good. Since you'll be highway patrols, you'll need to be able to catch up to any high-speed troublemakers. I'm expecting a lot from you. The Red Hobmankey leader faced the centaur, and even without exchanging any words, their eyes communicated a common sense of loyalty to Reborn. The two shook hands, solidifying this symbiotic relationship. We shall work hard. The Red Mankey bowed to Michael. Your headquarters will be here in the truck stop, but I want regular trips around the Golden Road frequently. I know you're quite short on people right now, but we'll see if we can improve your numbers in the future. There were currently only 10 Red Mankeys in the nation of Reborn, which was why Michael only asked for 10 centaurs to transfer over to the Queen's region. The highway patrol only consisted of 20 for now, but would certainly grow in the future, especially once they found the secret village of the Red Mankeys. Now, I think it's time to meet with the bandits. Tony, you'll be okay, right? Tony nodded his head. I'm still a little rattled, but I'm a lot more at ease now that I know that these people will protect the restaurant. The centaur and the Mankey both tapped their chests in confidence. Don't worry, Papa. I'll protect you in the future. Remy butted in. I'll become like those Dragonborns. Tony looked through the window and saw the two Dragonborns almost strangling each other for the last piece of chicken on the plate. Even when the chicken had already fallen on the floor, they still treated it as brand new. I hope not. Once he settled everything in the restaurant, Michael walked outside and saw the pile of unconscious bandits laying down on the concrete floor. An Orcanine shadow orc approached Michael. Shall I send him in now, boss? Sure. Michael nodded. As the orc used his shadow transport skill to summon a person from afar, Michael used a simple water ball spell to wake up all the sleeping bandits from their slumber. Ugh, my head. What happened? Who? As the bandits slowly regained consciousness, their eyes opened to see a silhouette of a person approaching them. They jerked their injured bodies, only to realize that their hands were cuffed behind them. Our boss just wants to ask you a few questions, a voice told them. We won't tell anything, one of the bandits muttered. You should have just killed me. Everyone here would rather die than submit to another company. Damn. We should have been like Sleazy and just left the group when FlareCorp approached us. The person chuckled. I didn't leave. I was captured. Sleazy walked closer to the bandits, letting them see his distinct face and sharp chin. They wouldn't mistake him for anyone else. He was the infamous Sleazy who didn't take no for an answer and took anything he wanted. You're here. We thought you were dead. You're with them now? Sleazy looked at the bandits with pity. I am not. Yet, I haven't earned it. Why? The bandit hoarsely shouted. You were the personification of a real bandit, following no laws, no humans, and no morals. What happened to you? I was reborn. I should have died and was given a second chance, a better life, and I realized that I had been doing things wrong my entire life. And now, I want all of you to realize that as well. The other bandits looked at Sleazy with doubt, wondering if he was real or a clone. You'll find out soon enough, Sleazy said with a smile. Chapter 328. Driver? Fighter? The bandits, expecting nothing but torture and mistreatment, were caught off guard when they were suddenly all given a piece of McTony's chicken to eat. At first, they thought it was poisoned or something, but as they took a bite, their eyes widened with delightful surprise. That's just one of the benefits of being a reborn prisoner, Sleazy said to them. After which 30 or so genin, low shadow, orcs appeared and attached themselves to each of the bandits, transporting them directly to the nation of Reborn, landing them in the open court of the prison. There, they saw all the amenities and all the benefits they were afforded even though they were only a prisoner. Just the fact that they had something warm to sleep on was already miles better than their lives back in the bastard bandit cave. Not only that, but they were offered amazing food that they wouldn't have been able to buy even if they were stealing as a bandit. Sleazy began the rebirth progress for the bandits. He would become the senior that would help them realize how great their lives were here in Reborn, just like how the infamous Deathclaw taught him how to accept life in the prison. With the first group of bandits secured and imprisoned, Michael and the Rebornians focused on the rest of them still roaming around the Queen's region. What are they planning on doing now? Michael asked Naruto and Sasuke. Bu-Tutu. I have sent out my own 50 mid-shadows to survey the area, and we have found a few other groups of bandits laying in wait around the Golden Road. They're targeting our taxis and our buses, Naruto reported. My Orcanine orcs will surely trample those troublemakers without problem.
Rahtata.
Boss, I did not think that 50 mid-shadows were enough, so I sent out 30 high shadows to accompany our Rebornian drivers during their duties. They'll be protected once the bandits attack, Sasuke said, sneaking a mocking smile at his rival. Huh? Are you saying that my Orcanines are not enough to defeat the bandits? Naruto faced Sasuke, puffing his chests and smacking it hard. I'm just preparing for the worst, Sasuke retorted. This is not the first time that your orcs have failed a mission. What did you say? Bu-Tutu.
Rahtata.
You heard me. Michael raised his hand. Please, leave your rivalry out of this for now. Boss, please assign this mission only to us. I promise you that we will not disappoint you, Sasuke said, spreading out his quills to make himself bigger and coincidentally, shooting out a few spines to his rival. Ow! Keep your grubby quills away from me. Boss, we'll do this mission. My co-chieftain here can't even control his own quills. Can't expect him to execute the mission well with that kind of carelessness. Michael shook his head. For now, since we're just dealing with a bunch of 4-star bandits, I'm not going to assign it to either of you. What? Boss, are you sure? If not us, then who? We'll let our own taxi drivers defend themselves, Michael revealed. Boss? The 2 orc chieftains simultaneously blurted out. Don't worry, I gave them something to help. Michael wanted to see if the Rebornians could protect themselves without the help of the Shadow Orcs. After all, every single one of them had the Lesser Unity defense with them and learned basic mystical art spells when they awakened. They should be able to deal with a bunch of bandits easily. Of course, Michael instructed the Shadow Orcs to help the drivers if things got too dicey. Not only that, but he gave them a few trump cards to use that would surely turn the tides of battle. Meanwhile, in a desolate part of the Golden Road a couple of days away from any large civilization, one Reborn taxicab drove through the flat highway at a brisk 60 kilometers per hour. His passenger was a traveling merchant, who came to the grafted cluster to pick up some precious herbs he would sell in Angora City. It was only the 2 of them in the Reborn taxicab with a bunch of plants in the back seat. They hadn't met any other taxicab in this part of the road, making the trip all the more lonely. The sun was already starting to set, but unfortunately, they were still about 1 day away from the Reborn truck stop, so they would have to camp out here in the wilderness for now. The driver drove the cab off-road and picked a seemingly safe spot in the wilderness. There were plants and vegetation covering their camping spot, so they wouldn't be easily spotted. But just as they set up their bedrolls, the bushes started rustling with activity. It wasn't long before 3 roughly dressed bandits showed themselves to the driver and the merchant. They took out their knives from their waists and flipped it around haphazardly. Its blade shined under the moonlight, showing its sharp, cutting threat. "Give me all your money and we won't kill ya," one of the bandits wearing only a shoulder guard threatened. "Money! Money! Give me money! A merchant! Jackpot!" The passenger merchant raised his trembling hands. "Do! Don't hurt me." The 3 bandits laughed. Robbing these merchants was easy, especially since they didn't have any guards around them. "All my gold coins are over there." The merchant bumbled over his words. The bandits looked at the rucksacks stacked near the fireplace and approached it with greed in their eyes. "You will do no such thing. He is a passenger of Reborn. He and all his belongings are protected by our authority." The 3 bandits looked at the driver, who wore a simple white long-sleeve t-shirt with a Reborn symbol and a captain's hat. "Under whose authority?" The shoulder guard bandit scoffed. "You're just a driver." He gestured for the other 2 bandits to deal with him. They approached the Rebornian driver, flipping their knives threateningly. But instead of getting scared, the driver balled his fists and put his arms up in self-defense. "I'm not just a driver," he said confidently. "I'm a Rebornian." The driver reached down his pockets, revealing a small, darkish brown, spherical object. The mostly bitter scent of the pellet wafted through the air. While the bandits were confused, the driver swallowed the pellet in one go. And immediately, a burst of energy erupted from the Rebornian driver. The bandits raised their arms to protect themselves from the gust of wind that assaulted their face. Once the wind subsided, they looked back at the driver. "What? How is that possible?" The 2 bandits felt a sense of overwhelming pressure coming off of the driver. It was as if the man had just broken through to the 3-star realm in a matter of seconds. That was supposed to be impossible. From the bottom of 2-star to almost the peak of 3-star. "What the hell are you 2 doing?" screamed the shoulder guard bandit. "Attack him!" But before they could recover from their shock, the driver raised his hands and summoned a magic circle in his palms. 2 pillars of water manifested beside the 2 bandits, each one as thick as a tree trunk and as tall as a human. Suddenly, these water pillars gained curved blade-like arms from the bottom to the top. The blades or brushes started rotating, turning from slow to blazingly fast in just a few seconds. The bandits' knives glowed in different colors as they used their respective spells to try and defend against the attack. Unfortunately for them, the driver finished the spell. Car wash, the driver shouted. Chapter 329, Golden Road in the East. The two pillars of water closed in on the two bandits, smacking them with the force of water rotating at the speed of almost 300 kilometers per hour. It was the equivalence of being attacked by a modern pressure washer. The bandits' rag-like clothes were immediately ripped into pieces and their armor were almost shredded through. "Grhh!" they screamed. And soon, the water pillars stopped rotating, dissipating into nothingness as the driver's spell finished its execution. The two bandits, unable to keep their consciousness active, fell to the floor drenched in water. Witnessing this with his own eyes, the shoulder guard bandit couldn't help but slowly back away in fear. The most frightening part of this was the fact that the spell wasn't even meant to be an offensive attack. It was just a simple 2-star spell meant to clean dust and grime off of an automobile. But as the driver consumed the special 35% concentrated chocolate pellet, his innate sugar rush skill activated and increased his measly bottom 2-star power into peak 3-star power. It was able to turn a harmless production spell into a ferocious shredder that could almost rip armor into pieces. What the hell?" the bandit screamed. He slowly backed away, intending to run away from this horrifying situation. The driver, still feeling the effects of the sugar rush skill, picked up the two knives dropped down by the unconscious bandits. He stared at the fleeing shoulder guard bandit, who stumbled as he tried to get over the bushes that obstructed his path. "Auto route to target," the driver muttered as he threw the two knives in his hand. His technique was sloppy and his aim was horrendous. However, the skill he invoked allowed the knives to automatically find itself driving to the target with pinpoint accuracy. After all, this was a skill that all Rebornian drivers were given once they got the job. This lessened their driving load during the day, allowing them to take their hands off the wheel and let the skill drive the automobile automatically. Now, it was used to hit the fleeing bandit directly in his legs, destroying his chance for fleeing. "Ha ha!" the driver panted. After taking a few breaths, he turned to the merchant passenger. "Are you okay, sir?" The merchant couldn't bring out any words out of his mouth. He only looked at the three bandits down on the ground, and back to the unassuming driver with disbelief in his eyes. Were all Rebornians as strong as him? The passenger asked himself. Once the bandits were taken care of, shadow orcs immediately appeared on the scene. They thanked the driver for their service, and disappeared carrying the unconscious bandits on their shoulders. Back at the Reborn headquarters in Angora City, Michael was soon informed about what happened with one of the Reborn taxi drivers. And just as he hoped, the driver was able to protect himself and his passenger all through the use of the experimental 35% chocolate. "This probably won't be the only time that the bandits will attack our drivers," Shiina said as she served a cup of water for Michael at his desk. "Yeah, this is Blazel's plan to discredit Reborn and the Golden Road. All the bandits we captured this far have told us that there are multiple more groups of bandits that are out there targeting taxis. Just like Sleazy said, all the bandits that were imprisoned soon found themselves liking their new situation. It took them a couple of days, but they started cooperating in Reborn's plans to destroy the bastard bandits from the inside out. They told everything they knew about the bandits' plans, including where and when they were most likely to strike. Fufufu, their plans are doing the exact opposite of what they want. We have seen a surge of people using the Reborn taxis to travel the Golden Road," Shiina said, showing Michael a complicated graph. "McTony's is also doing very well, increasing the number of visitors to the truck stop. They're treating it as a safe haven to sleep in. Shall we start the construction of the next truck stops?" "Not yet," Michael said. "We don't have resources to spare. For now, let's focus on the Golden Road expansion to the east. Speaking of which, how's it going?" The Golden Road was about 70% on the way to the forest on the east. It would probably take 1 or 2 more weeks before people could finally travel there using automobiles. But until that project was finished, people traveled to the east using conventional means, horse carriages. One such horse carriage convoy consisted of merchants and travelers who longed for Reborn to finish the Golden Road. "I can't wait until Reborn taxis can travel here," one of the female merchants said. I'm just a simple man. I just want to taste that McTony's chicken again soon. Do you think they'll build a new restaurant here? I hope so, the chubby merchant said. Once we sell our items in the East, we'll have enough money to stay in the nation of Reborn for at least a month. So, just stay strong until then. These merchants were part of the people who journeyed all the way to the ends of the Golden Road, leading them to the promised lands in the parched lands. There, they truly fell in love with the culture and the life of Rebornians. If they had enough money to spend, they would permanently stay in the nation of Reborn and start their own business there. They had been expanding their territory, so this was a chance for them to buy their own land there. Unfortunately, the only way they were going to earn enough for a down payment was by becoming traveling merchants to the east. The trip was dangerous because they had to travel to the forest of the bastard bandits, but it was precisely because of that danger that they would earn a lot of money once they succeeded. As they reached the border of the forest, the caravan stopped and waited. Usually, this would be the place where the bandits would appear and ask for a protection fee. But about an hour later, no bandits appeared. Weird. Those money-hungry bastards would have known we were here even before we reached the border. Should we go? I think we should. If they're not here, we have no one to pay. They can't blame us for that. Left with no choice, the merchants decided to move forward. As they traveled through the forest, the sun finally set and the caravan parked to camp. They unfurled their bedrolls and made a campfire for heat and for cooking. Although they were still wary of the bandits, the merchants decided to eat fast and go to sleep earlier. But unbeknownst to them, there were little spots of light watching over them from above the trees. Hee. Fresh food. I wonder if their emotions are tasty. Vivi, where are those bandits? Why are they not here? The fairy named Vivi wore a purple sequin dress that accentuated her natural curves and showed off her unblemished skin. Her wings were as violet as lilies and as clear as a crystal. She looked at the humans below with a mischievous smile on her face. We'll just have to do it ourselves, she said. Chapter 330. Consume Emotions. The merchant's early evening dinner of porridge soup was disrupted by the loud roar in the distance. It sounded like a mountain had just erupted and caused the entire land to shift to the side. What was that? Guards, can you please check that out? The caravan of merchants employed adventurers to protect them in their travels. So when the loud guttural roar appeared, they were the one tasked to ascertain the safety of the entire group. The 4 adventurers, 1 tank, 1 swordsman, 1 mage, and 1 herbalist raised their weapons in the air as they faced the source of the sound. Grua! Another roar caught all of them by surprise. It sounded closer, much closer than they would have liked. It was as if the monster was already right in front of them. The adventurers looked out into the darkness of the forest, when all of a sudden, the ground underneath them exploded outwards, sending them flying backwards into the merchants' camp. Soil and rock rained down on the entire camp. Everyone stood up and slowly backed away as they looked at the giant creature that emerged from the ground. Its entire structure was made out of soil-like minerals that was usually found only in the depths of the ground. Its 2 trunk-like feet were planted squarely on the ground, supporting the rest of its enormous body. Its upper body mimicked that of a burly man's physique, with large stones acting as its pectoral and abdominal muscles. The arms on its side resembled that of a thick tree's branches, with roots still growing up its arms. Above its body were 2 glowing sources of red light, acting as the eyes of the monster itself. The rocky mouth beneath its large nose opened wide, showing a crystal-like material on their gums. Grua! Its roar was akin to 2 continents crashing into each other. It was deep and soul-piercing. The adventurers looked up at the rocky creature with horror painted on their faces. A rock golem, the tank muttered under his breath, his voice cracking. 6-star. A 6-star monster. Their fear was not without merit. After all, their adventuring party was only rated for monsters 4-star and below. Defeating a creature 2 stars above that was a guaranteed impossibility. Run! The swordsman screamed to the merchants. It was only now that the caravan of businessmen moved with haste. They started bolting opposite of the rock golem. But it was at that moment where the ground exploded once again, catapulting the fleeing merchants back into the feet of the rock golem. Everyone despaired as they saw 3 more rock golems emerge from the ground, each one as gargantuan and as powerful as the first one. No way! We're dead! Surrounded by these 4 monstrous creatures, the caravan of merchants thought they were close to seeing their end. They had no way to escape. The 4 rock golems raised their branch-like arms up in the air, intending to smash these humans into bits. Even the tank's shield won't protect against the onslaught of these 4 monsters. While the humans were in this state of terror, 5 fairies fluttered their wings as they looked down at the emotional scene. These rock golems were their own construction, and they used it frequently to create a high-stakes and tense situation for humans to experience. After all, their innate skill as a fairy consume emotion allowed them to reach down the metaphysical dimension of human emotion and use all the complex and passionate feelings they had for sustenance. The pink-haired fairy, who was slightly bigger than the other 4, led the ritual for today's fine dining experience. She danced in the night sky, letting the small powder of golden sand-like particles float down into the ground. A fairy's dust not only allowed a person or object to float, but it also heightened the emotions of humans who came into contact with them. So, the merchants and the adventurers felt the fear of their lives even more as they faced the 4 rock golems. Vivi looked at the humans and saw the chubby middle-aged man as the perfect candidate. He was the one showing the most emotions. She swooped down on top of his head as a tiny magic circle appeared on her hands. "Come down, my pretties," Vivi whispered to her fairy friends above. The 4 fairies floated down as well and chose their own targets. The magic circles they conjured allowed them to harvest the emotion and turn it into usable energy. Hi, Vivi laughed. "Let's eat. Golems, do it now." Finally, the rock golems brought down their arms, making the humans clench their own bodies out of fear. In that moment, it was as if time itself had slowed down for the fairies. The intense situation brought a vulnerability within the humans and allowed them to see through their memories and their emotions. Vivi licked her lips as she sorted through the different lights of emotions present in her target's head. She immediately looked for the purple lights in his memories. This was the emotion of fear, specifically, the fear of death. It was the strongest of all emotions and gave the most amount of sustenance for the fairies. This was why they tolerated those brutish bastard bandits. They were the ones who regularly put the fear of death into people.
Bon appétit,
Vivi said. But just as she was about to consume the violet light, a new light suddenly caught her eye. It was just peeking down below from the fear emotion. Curious, Vivi pushed aside the violet light and saw a unique and new color she had never seen before. It was the color blue, which was mostly associated with sadness or regret. However, this shade of blue was different. It was lighter, much lighter, as if the emotion in the memory was something positive instead of it being filled with regret. What was interesting about this was that this sky blue color was almost the same size as the violet color, meaning this emotion almost overpowered the fear of death itself. Vivi decided to consume this blue emotion first, curious to see what kind of emotion of memory this would invoke in her mind. She closed her eyes and inhaled with her mouth. The sky blue light in her target's mind started to be sucked into her lips like smoke, allowing her to consume the emotion and briefly make contact with the memory associated with this emotion. Now, the memory she sees within this emotion wasn't exact, but she was able to see glimpses of images from the person's perspective. As Vivi consumed the blue light, she started to see just that. The picture of a grand, otherworldly city showed itself to her. She was looking up at the tall buildings defying the laws of gravity, almost as if it was one of those spires that magicians built as their base. But these buildings weren't made of mana. In fact, they used no mana to remain constructed at all. The image soon faded, and more pictures of life in this city flashed through Vivi's mind. She couldn't understand most of what these images meant, with one of them being the depiction of a man striking a ball with a bat and people cheering loudly beside her. However, there was one clear emotion that she did understand. It was longing. It was a desire to go back to this city. And as she sucked in all of the emotion in her target, there was one name that stuck to her mind. Reborn. Chapter 331. Fairy Seas Reborn. Meanwhile, the counterattack on the bastard bandits was going extremely well. Each and every time that they showed up to ambush a reborn taxi, they would always end up getting defeated by the chocolate-powered taxi drivers. The bastard bandits seemed to have finally noticed that their numbers were slowly whittling down. The groups that they sent down for missions ended up being missing in action, as if they just disappeared out of thin air. And since no one was returning from the ambushes, they had no idea what was happening. In response, the bandits sent out more bandits per group, making sure that they had the numbers advantage in the ambush. Now, the Rebornian drivers would find themselves outnumbered almost 10-1. But thankfully, the Shadow Orcs were always there to support whenever things got too dangerous. So to find out their progress in the fight against the bastard bandits, Michael visited the Rebornian prison to see for himself. "How many do we have now?" Michael asked Sleazy. "About 500, boss. But I don't think they'll send more bandits out soon. They'll know something is up and they'll hole up in the cave." Michael nodded. "Yeah. The orcs are telling me that there are less and less ambushes happening in the Golden Road. They're still there, but they just stay in the dark and spy on the automobiles. They're trying to find out the secret why they're losing the ambushes. They won't. While they're spying on us, the orcs are spying on them," Michael assured. "By the way, how are things going here?" The reformed prisoner pointed at the numerous bandits wearing orange jumpsuits gathered in the open courtyard. Some were playing mini baseball, some were working out, and some were even participating in a painting class. "Look at them, boss. When they first arrived here, they wanted to escape any time they could. But now, they've adjusted to life here just like I have." Sleazy rubbed his nose, a bit embarrassed. "Actually, they're thanking me for helping them be captured in the prison. If not, then they would have been stuck in their cave becoming Flarecorp's lackeys." Michael was glad that these bandits were given a chance. Although they definitely did some horrible crimes in their lives, that didn't mean that they weren't deserving of redemption. And with his supreme skill, he even saw that these prisoners had a wide range of talents that they could pursue better than just throwing fists. There were potential engineers, chefs, and even artists. He planned on integrating them into society once they had fully served their time in prison. They were valuable manpower that Michael needed in all of his projects in the Queen's region. Speaking of which, Michael wanted to check in on the progress of the Golden Road in the east. According to his estimations, they must be closing in on the forest. He bid goodbye to Sleazy and teleported himself to the very edge of the Golden Road. In front of him were a group of construction workers using their innate skill, excavate path, to dig up dirt and stone from the ground to make way for the pouring of concrete. Behind him, he saw an automobile truck with an open load containing stacks of metal rebar meant for supporting concrete to make it much more durable. Beside it was another truck whose load was a cylindrical drum that was rotating at a constant speed. This was where the liquid concrete was stored. The on-site Rebornian engineer looked up from his paper and finally saw Michael in front of him. "Boss." "Hey, Busker. How's the construction going?" The yellow Hobmanki engineer showed an awkward look. "Right now it's going well, boss. But our scouts further up the forest are experiencing some weird events." The engineer scouts were in charge of surveying the way for the Golden Road. They made sure that the path was suitable for construction. Unfortunately, their analysis was disrupted by some supernatural. Weird how? They would find themselves tripping on flat roads. They would lose items from their backpacks. And when they slept, they heard whisperings and incessant laughter around their tents. Michael looked beyond and saw that the Golden Road was just 10 or so kilometers away from the luscious green forest of the east. "It's the fairies," Michael concluded. "Fairies? My gosh. Are they dangerous, sir?" "Probably not. If they were, then they would have already attacked us." The on-site engineer heaved a sigh of relief. "They only want the emotions of people, so they'll probably scare you in the night." The engineer was scared again. "Will we be able to construct the Golden Road in the forest?" "They'll probably harass you as you get closer. But don't worry. I'll have me and a few others accompany you while you work," Michael assured him. "Thank you, boss." Once the engineer found out that Michael would be protecting them, he was inspired to start working a lot harder than before. Back to the merchants and the adventurers. They all closed their eyes as the 4 6-star rock golems brought down their thick, branch-like arms towards them. They thought this was the end of their lives. But a few seconds later, nothing happened. Slowly, they opened their eyes to see that the giant rock golems that surrounded them were gone, with no trace of them ever being there in the first place. They all patted their bodies and felt no injury or change. It made them wonder if everything that happened was just a dream or an illusion that was brought upon by deprivation of sleep. Meanwhile, once they had their fill, Vivi and her friends blipped out of reality itself. Soon, they appeared in a world covered in darkness, where the trees glowed with a green and blue light, and where the veins of its leaves twinkled with luminescence. This was the dimension of the fairies, located in a subspace coinciding with the forest of the east. This place was like the mirror copy of the forest itself, but contained in a different dimension that only fairies could access. In this place, they could come in and out of reality whenever or wherever they wanted. This was how they stayed out of people's sight, allowing them to traverse the forest without anybody knowing. Vivi looked down and saw the merchants and the adventurers quickly pack their things up and leave in the middle of the night. They were spooked about what happened and immediately wanted to return. On a whim, Vivi decided to follow them from the fairy dimension. She watched them turn the caravan around and race off to the forest's exit. There was still a worried look on their faces, worried about those strange rock golems that suddenly appeared and disappeared out of nowhere. But as they left the forest, Vivi saw their expressions change from one of worry to one of relief. She looked beyond and saw these humans and demi-humans working together to pour some kind of liquid onto a ditch. Behind them were these strange metal carriages that looked like monsters laying in wait. And as Vivi looked closer, she finally saw the badge embroidered on all the workers' shirts. It was the symbol of R, one that she was familiar with from her target's memory. This was Reborn. Chapter 332, Fleeing Fairy. Fairies weren't supposed to go out of the boundary of the forest, but Vivi was spurred on by her curious mind to check out what the Rebornians were doing. While in the mirror dimension of the fairies, Vivi traversed outside the forest and went towards the Rebornians. This allowed her to stealthily spy on these reborn people without them knowing about it. As she got closer, the first thing she noticed was the road they built beyond the horizon. Even she was impressed. It was incredibly flat and made out of sturdy natural materials. No magic was involved in it. This made her all the more impressed about the people making them. They all seemed to be performing intricate and complex types of magic that she had never seen before. These spells were weirdly specific and seemed to be molded perfectly for their jobs. For example, the ones in charge of digging used spells that specifically created a wide uniform path the same as the road behind them. Stranger still was the fact that there were demi-humans in their midst.
Magically inclined demi-humain.
They were even led by a yellow mankey, whose species were known for their inability to cast magic. Reborn became ever more stranger as Vivi observed them. She looked at the metal automobiles parked along the road. At first, she thought that they were just a mere useless pile of creation. But then, one of the cars sped off back towards the road at blazingly fast speeds. Are those metal golems? Even fairies couldn't make golems as intricate and as powerful as those. In fact, it was so advanced that Vivi didn't even sense magic from it at all. Focus, Vivi reminded herself. She wasn't here to marvel at their strange inventions. She was here to understand why Reborn evoked such strong feelings from other people. Vivi fluttered her wings, shedding off large amounts of golden dust from her own body down into the ground. With a little wave of her hand, a magic circle appeared and started to command the earth mana below to do her bidding. Suddenly, the hard rock underneath the ground burst upwards, revealing a giant rock golem that looked down at the Rebornians with its red glinting eyes. This should be enough to scare them, Vivi thought. But upon seeing this terrifying rock creature emerge in front of them, the people of Reborn showed no sign of fear or distress at all. They just looked up at the rock golem with only a slight bit of surprise and wonder. Ah! This must be the rock golems those merchants told us about, said one of the Satyr construction workers. I wonder how they work. A catfolk cement mixer replied, still manually mixing a batch of concrete. They move kind of similar to those metallic arms that are on those factories back in the nation. What is up with these people? Vivi thought to herself. She had no idea what they were talking about. And even if she wanted to know, these people weren't exhibiting a strong enough emotion for her to feast on. Their reactions were mild at best. I better tell the boss about this, said the yellow Hobmanki engineer. Michael was soon awoken from his slumber by a low shadow orc. The Orcupy ninja informed Michael about what happened in the Golden Road construction project and urged him to come quickly. He thanked the orc before teleporting himself into one of his shadow clones. He left attached to one of the cement mixers they used. As he ascended from the shadows, he immediately saw the large rock golem standing above his Rebornian workers. Rock golem. These constructs are non-living beings and are purely made out of mana. Their destructive powers are strong, but are limited to the amount of mana left behind in their cores. These rock golems are usually the protectors and the main defensive force of the elusive fairy race. Once he read this description, Michael immediately scanned the area for any sign of the fairies. And what did he see but the silhouette of a very small human with wings flying above the rock golem itself? He didn't see the actual appearance of the fairy, but he did see the mana signatures of one. He saw an abnormal gathering of light mana in the sky of what was presumably a fairy. He didn't know what kind of magic they used to hide themselves, but the light mana from their bodies could not be hidden away from his supreme skill, even if it used the bright sun on the skies as another camouflage. Boss, what should we do with the rock golem? The yellow Hobmanki engineer asked him. It's not doing anything to us, so we're hoping to keep it as our pet. I'm afraid you're too late, Michael replied. Somebody already owns the rock golem. Michael used a simple flotation spell to fly up in the sky and meet with the fairy. And as he ascended, he felt as if the fairy finally took notice of him. It turned into his direction and stared at his face, seemingly wondering if he could truly see through their stealth. There was a moment where the fairy shook their heads, unbelieving of the fact that a human could see through them. But as Michael continued to fly in a straight line towards them, the fairy was forced to realize that the golden-haired boy could truly see them without a problem. It immediately tried to run away. Wait, I just want to talk, Michael hurriedly said to the fairy. It looked back at him for a second, only for it to speed away from him in fear. The fact that a human could finally see through them was a truly frightening and shocking ordeal that forced the fairy into a retreat. Michael chased the floating light in the sky until they reached the border of the forest. Once the fairy entered inside the territory, the light mana seemed to have disappeared from his vision, making him lose sight of the fairy. Michael stopped in the air, just a few meters away from the leaf crown of a tree. What's going on here? ChatJK 4. Analyzing surroundings. Complete. I have detected small and minute anomalies of mana in the forest. Some mana spontaneously enter and leave the territory as if there was a hole in the very space itself. Normal people cannot notice this difference, but your supreme skill has allowed this software to gather enough data to conclude a finding. What is it? The forest seems to contain an altered version of a pocket dimension inside. The whole forest. That is correct. Michael floated inside the forest, bracing himself to enter the pocket dimension, yet nothing happened. Can I enter this pocket dimension? Yes. The data we have gathered from the pocket dimension in Grief's tomb allowed for me to get a superficial understanding of pocket dimensions itself. That is not inherently enough to break into an occupied and protected pocket dimension. However, the fairy's entrance into the pocket dimension created a brief weakness in their defense systems, allowing me to analyze how to get inside. Michael smiled. He would pat his own head for ChatJK4's impressive skills if it wouldn't be so awkward. Suddenly, a large wave of information washed over his head, allowing him to grasp a new magic theory, allowing to enter the pocket dimension of the fairies. Chapter 333, Entering the Fairy Realm. A magic circle appeared around Michael's wrist as mana flowed through his body. Slowly, the appearance of a simple key made out of pure mana manifested inside his hand. Michael grasped this key and gently pushed it in the air, feeling a resistance that no heavy air could make. As he turned the key, A satisfying click resounded in the forest before his surroundings changed completely. The bright sun that was peeking around the leaves of the trees was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the entirety of the skies had been enshrouded in eternal darkness. "So this is the pocket dimension of the fairies," Michael remarked. He looked behind him and saw nothing but a dark fog beyond the forest, where the Rebornians were supposed to be. Flying back, he was able to see the Rebornians still hard at work on the Golden Road project, with the construction workers starting to pour liquid cement on the paths. He flew towards the on-site engineer who looked beyond the forest in search of him. "Where did boss go?" The yellow hobmonkey asked himself out loud. The demi-human could not see Michael even when he was floating right in front of him. This is probably how they hid themselves all this time, Michael realized. This pocket dimension was different from normal ones because Michael could interact with the real world through this pocket dimension. There was no wonder how the fairies sustained themselves all this time while keeping away from everyone's eyes. This made him wonder if this pocket dimension was a natural occurrence or a creation of the so-called Pixie Queen. He flew back towards the forest and decided to venture deeper into the territory of the fairies. He made sure to keep his presence low so as not to spook any of the fairies and provoke unwanted attention. As he journeyed through the forest, he saw that despite the absence of the sun as a source of light, the forest was still illuminated with bright overlapping colors. Trees glowed with neon luminescence, vines pulsated with life as the wind rustled its knots, and the grasses were replaced by these glimmering tentacles growing out of the ground. These vegetations were an exact mirror image of the real world, but altered to become a mutated version of itself. Even the wildlife contained inside this world were not exempted from this fact. Birds flew with 3 eyes, owls crawled on the floor, and unexpectedly, slimes jumped through the small puddles of green water in the crevices on the ground. Although these were very interesting sceneries, Michael reminded himself of his goal: to meet the fairies. So, he ignored the croaking of the flying frogs next to him and slowly flew through the forest in search for the fairies. Eventually, he saw in the distance a bevy of large mushrooms spread around the kingdom of this otherworldly forest. These abnormally large mushrooms reminded Michael of the birdhouses popular back in his previous world. It was the same size, and there was even a small door-like hole on its wide stalk just enough for a bird to walk through. Finally, peeking through the tentacle vines of a large tree, he saw for the first time the real appearance of the fairies. They looked exactly the same as in his imagination. They were as small as a finger, with glittery butterfly wings on their backs. Fairies were populated with both men and women, and they were all objectively good-looking in terms of human beauty standards. They lived in a tight gathering of mushrooms around a group of trees. Some were down on the ground, while others were high up on the branches. It was a civilization of fairies. Just then, Michael saw a small gathering of fairies near the spotted mushroom plaza. "I told you he looked at me," one fairy wearing a violet dress made out of vines and leaves shouted as she tried to convince the rest of the fairies surrounding her. "Vivi, that's impossible," said one of the elderly fairies sitting in a sprout-like chair on the opposite side of Vivi. "No human can see through the other dimension of the forest." The other fairies agreed on this sentiment. However, Vivi was certain of what she saw. "There was no mistake," she clarified. "He was trying to talk to me even when I was shrouded in this dimension." The elderly fairy squinted as she looked at Vivi. "This is not another one of your pranks, right? This would be unbecoming of your—" "I'm not lying," Vivi asserted. However, her reputation within the fairy community seemed to be a little bit shaky, as not a lot of them were convinced of her words. She was quite a troublemaker in these parts, and it wouldn't be out of her realm of tricks to do this. "You need to be more educated, Vivi. You cannot be playing tricks on us now that you're this old. And besides, your direct actions could directly affect our fairy race. You must be careful with what you say," the elderly fairy warned. The other fairies seemed to have heard enough and started to fly off the mushroom plaza. But just then, Vivi whipped her head to the side and saw Michael peeking through the mushroom vines. They made eye contact, with both exhibiting a sense of surprise. Michael was shocked that she was able to sense his presence even when he was actively trying to hide it, and Vivi was surprised that he was able to traverse the pocket dimension of the forest. Seeing that his cover was blown, Michael walked through the low-hanging branches of a tree and entered the village of the fairies. "Hello, nice to meet you guys," he said with a disarming smile. All fairies turned to look up at the giant creature that suddenly trespassed in their territory. Shock reverberated through them in the form of fluttering butterfly wings. "Kya! A human!" The fairies fled away from Michael out of fear. The only one who faced him was Vivi, whose sense of pride overwhelmed her sense of fear. "See? I told you guys!" she shouted with a smile. Suddenly, the ground beneath Michael's feet started to shake. He looked around and saw something emerging from the ground. The head of a giant spotted red mushroom ascended, disturbing the glittery soil around it. It continued to emerge upwards, growing, until it reached a height just a little bit smaller than the trees. 2 spots of red light opened in its stalk underneath its cap, showing sentience. 2 other mushrooms emerged right next to it, before it jumped up towards the stalk and attached themselves to its sides, creating arms for the giant mushroom creature. "Brew!" it screamed, sending reverberations throughout the forest. King Mushroom Golem. This golem is born from the altered ecosystem of a pocket dimension, allowing it to draw infinite amounts of mana from its surroundings. As long as this creature is in its natural habitat, then it can propagate and clone its body endless times. The king mushroom turned towards Michael, raising its mushroom arm towards him and slamming it down hard. The crash caused dust and soil to fly into the air, obscuring the vision for the fairies. They slowly walked out of their houses, thinking that the intruder was taken care of. Chapter 334. Fight with the Mushroom King. As the dust settled, the fairies were surprised to see the golden-haired boy still standing on his feet. Gasps resounded through their village. Michael looked at the king mushroom and was wary of its 7-star power. This was perhaps the strongest creature he had faced aside from Grieve. The fact that it had almost broke his absolute unity defense when it attacked him meant that this creature was not something that he should face lightly. The king mushroom used its 2 trunk-like legs to move closer to Michael, using its giant mushroom arms to slap Michael into a paste. Michael raised his hand and casted Fireball on both hands, flattening them to create a wall of fire. The mushroom's arms collided with the fire, with a squeaking sound coming out of its body as it began to get cooked by the fire. The Mushroom King roared, "Varu!" before it released a cloud of spores that intended to bury Michael with toxic fumes. Just then, a prismatic shield appeared and fought off the mana-filled spore attack of the Mushroom King. But it didn't stop there. The creature shook its head and continued to release more and more spores until Michael's body was shrouded in a yellow cloud of dust. The spores began eating through the absolute unity defense, with its 7-star power dominating Michael's 5-star cultivation. Michael immediately took out 4 chocolate pellets from his pocket and consumed it in one go. Suddenly, a burst of energy exploded out of his body, pushing the spores and the Mushroom King away from him as his body began to emanate a strength equal to that of a peak 6-star magician, just 1/2 step away from the Mushroom King's 7-star power. Any spores that tried to eat through his prismatic shields were now destroyed completely by the unity mana within it. The Mushroom King glared at Michael before using its arms to slap its own head, creating a different colored spore that slowly spread through the air. Suddenly, the forestry started to squirm with life. The trees that were slowly swaying in the wind now moved with purposeful activity, with its branches slivering towards Michael with violent intent. Even the glowing, tentacle-like grass vegetation beneath his feet tried to grasp at him and drag him down into the ground. It seemed that the whole forest had turned into the Mushroom King's lackeys. "Go woo!" the Mushroom King shouted. It rushed towards him, threatening to punch his stomach. Michael tried to cast Water Ball to protect himself from the Mushroom King's attacks, but a branch slithered through his arm and tried to disrupt his casting of the spell. Using this chance, the Mushroom King rushed towards Michael with even fervor. In response, Michael flashed a cheeky smile. Just before the mushroom's arms hit his body, a wall of water manifested just in time, completely stopping its momentum. Growl! And from this water wall, A large fist formed into ice and punched the Mushroom King into a tree, causing it to release some of its spores unintentionally. Michael looked at the tentacles grabbing his feet, and at the branches holding his arms. His eyes flashed with a glint as he peered even deeper through its individual cells and into its very DNA. There, within its natural helix structure, were spores made out of a gathering of mana. Their unique chain link was very similar to how atoms form into a chemical molecule to achieve a very different material. And it seemed that this unique group of mana was how the Mushroom King used to take control of its surroundings. Magic theory acquired. ChatJK4's voice resounded through his mind. Creating a counterstrike, Michael smiled and suddenly, magic circles appeared around his body, with each circle depicting a reversed form of the magic theory that the Mushroom King used. Each spore around him quaked with intensity as they felt an overpowering grip around their body. They tried to resist, but their individual mana particles couldn't help but offer themselves up to Michael, allowing him full control over all of them. Slowly, the grip of the branches trapping his body loosened, allowing him to finally set foot on the ground. The Mushroom King felt its connection with its spores suddenly cut off. Couldn't understand what had happened. But just then, Michael raised his hand and pointed at the Mushroom King. The slithering tree branches and the tentacle weeds on the ground wrapped itself around the Mushroom King's body, letting it have a taste of its own medicine. It looked at Michael, confused as to how he was able to take control of its own spell. "True!" it screamed, releasing another cloud of spores to try and take control of the vegetation around. But Michael wouldn't let that happen. He casted a spell, pulling a large boulder from the ground and hurling it at the Mushroom King. With its body still restricted, the Mushroom King pumped out a cloud of spores, letting it absorb some of the impact. But still, Michael's spell was enough to cause bruising in its head and stalk, with violet blood starting to leak out of its injuries. Michael casted another spell, creating a bolt of lightning in his hands. And with the help of ChatJK4, the optimal throwing position of the spear-throwing athletes in his previous world washed over his head. The lightning zoomed towards the Mushroom King, who quickly grew a large mushroom head in its body as a shield. The lightning spear collided with the mushroom shield, burning through its entire head and letting electricity course through the Mushroom King's body. The aftermath left the Mushroom King's head limp, as the injuries it sustained was enough to weaken its body. It was on its last legs. As a last-ditch effort, the Mushroom King released a puff of spores, which quickly spread throughout the forest. Slowly, Michael saw the trees start to contort and twist unnaturally. Even the ground started to turn as if his whole world was skewed to the side. Lights seemingly coming out of nowhere bloomed around him, creating a flurry of colors that was mesmerizing to look at. This was called an acid trip, with the Mushroom King's spores creating a large illusion that allowed it to secretly spread its spores to a different location, allowing it to regrow into 3 different bodies. But just as these spores were about to plant itself on the ground, the Mushroom King suddenly felt its connection with them sever completely. Michael, even in the face of mesmerizing illusions, could still pick up the minute and small changes of mana in his surroundings. He raised his hand, levitating the 3 seed spores of the Mushroom King in the air, and with a quick spell cast, 3 wind crescents bursted out of his magic circles and cleaved the spores in half, killing the Mushroom King's intent to regenerate itself into a new body. Battered, bruised, and with no way to regenerate its body, the Mushroom King looked at Michael with indignation in its face. "Well fought," Michael praised him. He raised his hand, pointing it at the Mushroom King. The tip glowed with the power of unity mana, illuminating even the darkest regions of the forest. Chapter 335. Vivi's Excitement. The fairies were in complete disbelief as they watched the fight between their elder Mushroom King Guardian fight with the human boy. It was supposed to be their last line of defense, something that could protect them against even the most numerous of enemies. Yet somehow, this young kid was able to force into submission. In truth, the Mushroom King really was a very strong and feared monster in the world. It could defeat armies using its numerous toxic spores that even the best herbalists couldn't counter. Not only that, but inside this very pocket dimension, The Mushroom King was almost immortal as it could spawn itself infinitely using its own spores. However, it was in an extremely bad matchup against Michael, who could create and synthesize skills at the drop of a hat. His complete mastery over mana allowed him to prevent the Mushroom King from using its best weapons, nullifying its spores and basically turning the Mushroom King into a harmless cow. The elderly fairy floated off her chair and looked up at Michael with bewilderment in her eyes.
Impossible.
She muttered. The rest of the fairies stared at Michael, whose finger was glowing with an intense white light as he pointed it at the Mushroom King. That is the mana of old, the elderly fairy muttered. If it was indeed the power held by the ancient people, then it meant that they had no chance against him even if they tried. Meanwhile, with the Unity gun locked and loaded, the Mushroom King was just mere moments away from its untimely death. Above Michael's head, the figure of a mechatronic right hand holding a deagle started to appear, shimmering as it manifested. It was just then that Vivi suddenly flew in front of Michael and put herself in between him and the Mushroom King. "Wait! Wait!" she shouted hurriedly, waving her tiny little hands to get his attention, to which Michael immediately released the power in his fingers, with the light of the Unity gun slowly dimming in his hands. The figure above his head dissipated in the air before it could truly manifest itself in reality. He wasn't really planning on killing the Mushroom King. He just wanted to get their attention and get them to listen to his words. And it worked. You're from Reborn, right? Vivi asked him. "Yeah, my name is Michael," he replied. Excitement poured over Vivi's face. Her wings fluttered even faster as she darted around Michael's body, in a fit of eagerness and anticipation. "Really? Then that means you can tell me all about those amazing stories about Reborn." Yeah," Michael said, unsure of what the fairy was talking about. He didn't even know how she knew about Reborn in the first place. Then, Vivi turned to the Mushroom King, who was still restricted from vines and branches slithering around its body. "You can go now," she said, wiping her hands and giving the creature some of the golden dust surrounding her body. The cuts and bruises it sustained from being hit by a giant boulder was immediately cured, becoming as good as new within just a few seconds. "Growl," it muttered, rubbing its spotted red head cutely towards the fairy. Then, it turned to Michael and grunted before it walked off into the forest, still giving him a wary look. "Sorry about that." Vivi quickly turned back to Michael. "He thought you were an intruder."
I'm Vivi.
"Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you." Michael held out his hand and Vivi grabbed a hold of his pinky finger and flew up and down with it, creating the equivalent of a handshake. "Oh, you should meet my family," she said, pointing to the fairies hiding behind their mushroom houses with fear. Finally, the elderly fairy floated over towards Michael's face, going uncomfortably close to him as she scrutinized his face. Even though she looked to be 80 years old or more, there were still traces of beauty in her face that were only weathered down by time. Her hair was white, and she wore a very regal and formal dress compared to the other fairies around her. You're a human, correct?" Michael nodded. Yeah? What is it that you want? Are you planning on conquering us?" The elderly lady fairy shot a threatening look at Michael. "I'm not planning on conquering this place. I just wanted to talk," he said, raising his hands innocently. She stared at him for a few seconds, and even though she wasn't using any kind of magical spells or skills, Michael felt as if she was seeing through him with an X-ray. Could she be the pixie queen they were talking about? Michael, though, to himself. Finally, she seemed to have seen enough and softened her look on Michael. "I'm Virian, and I'm the mother of that troublemaker over there," she said, pointing her head towards Vivi. "We should talk more, Michael. There are some things that you and I should both know." "Wait, mother," she protested, pulling on Michael's sleeves. "I'm going to talk to him first. Didn't I tell you that we discovered a new flavor of emotion in humans? It's because of him and his Reborn company." Virian shot a look of surprise. Vivi had talked about this new emotion they tasted, but hardly anyone could believe that it was true. After all, everyone knew that fear was the strongest of all emotions and it was what humans feel most when they near death. So, Many fairies just considered it another one of Vivi's tricks. However, she had proven herself to be truthful this time, with Michael being able to cross into their realm even when he was a human. All right, Virion relented. However, the human and I must talk privately later. I shall consult the annals of history to see if this had any precedence. The elderly fairy soon floated away, leaving Michael all alone for Vivi to pester. Michael couldn't help but look back at Virion and saw her floating down the village with her hands behind her back. She descended into her house in the center, walking directly into her room. Before she closed the door, he saw her take a book out of her shelf and turned its page to read it. Whatever she wanted to talk to him about seemed important. But while he was contemplating on this, Vivi kept on buzzing around his face, trying to get his attention. Hey, 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 look at me, she said, putting on different faces. Mr. Reborn. Michael snapped out of his thoughts and focused on Vivi. Are you sure this is more important than what your mother wants to talk about? Of course it is. She's just stuck in the past, while I want to move forward to the future. Since she was the first one to acknowledge him, he decided to humor her for now. Unfortunately, once Virion left Michael, the other fairies found courage to fly up to Michael and observe him up close and personal. They buzzed around him, awed and confused at his ability to trespass into their realm and even defeat their Mushroom King Guardian. Vivi, is he really a human? Maybe he's just a giant fairy. No fairy is this large. He's definitely a human boy. Maybe he's not a human. Maybe he's a shapeshifter. Michael massaged his head. Who wouldn't be overwhelmed with 20 fairies buzzing and shouting around their face? Finally, Vivi shushed everyone around her and turned to Michael. Everyone shut up. Now, Mr. Reborn, please tell us everything about your company. Chapter 336. Fairy Needs Fear. Surrounded by all these expectant fairies, Michael did as Vivi asked and told them all about the nation of Reborn. First of all, he told them that it was located deep in the south of King's region, in the infamous Parched Lands. Gasps sounded out through the fairies. Really? How is it possible to live in a desert? Is that true? And there's thousands of people living there. Vivi and her 5 other fairies nodded furiously, remembering the memories that they saw when they consumed the emotions of the merchants. We saw it. Demi-humans and humans living together in a fantastic city, with buildings of metal rising up. There's lights in all these buildings even at night. It's like the stars descended down to this desert. Shush everyone. I want to hear more, Vivi said, obediently sitting down in a lotus pose. Tell us more, Mr. Reborn. Are there really beasts of metal zooming at speeds faster than horses? That's not possible. How could that be? The other fairies simply couldn't believe such things. Lifeless metals shouldn't be moving at all, much less speeding faster than a horse. They're called automobiles and… Michael continued telling them all about the nation of Reborn, and slowly but surely, the entire village of the fairies sat down in front of Michael and listened to his stories as if they were watching a movie. This was perhaps the first time that any of them would be interacting with a human face-to-face. After all, they only knew about human culture through consuming their emotions. Not only that, but the unique circumstance of Reborn greatly piqued the interests of the fairies, with gasps and exhales of surprises coming out of their mouths periodically, especially during the part when Michael told them about their cooperation with the Dwarven Kingdom. You're friends with those dwarves? We haven't seen them even from memory. We only know about them through our books. The only species that were more isolated than the fairies were none other than those dwarves. The fact that Michael became allied with them was a feat that was even more impressive than him defeating the Mushroom King. Speaking of the monster, the Mushroom King was also silently hiding behind the tree and listening to his stories. See guys, Vivi said, addressing the entirety of the fairy village. Reborn is able to give people such new and novel emotions that we have yet to taste. I can see how people have large amounts of emotion for Reborn. I want to see it for myself. Michael found his opening. The reason why he wanted to talk with the fairy in the first place was because he wanted their permission to construct the Golden Road. With their powers and their mastery over this pocket dimension, He could see them making the construction project 10 times harder than normal. So, it was imperative he got their assistance or at the very least their approval. "Why not just go see it for yourselves?" he asked them. "I'm building a golden road that will connect this forest to the nation of Reborn. It will only take less than a month of travel. Even less if you use our automobiles and our trains." The fairies were not the adventurous types. In their entire history, they had always stayed in the comfort of their own pocket dimension where they were the most secure. However, the prospect of seeing the nation of Reborn for themselves was at the very least a tempting idea to do at least once in their life. "No thanks," Vivi said, turning her head away. "But this road of yours is very interesting. It means that people will travel more to this forest, right? Then this means that there's more emotions for us to consume." Yee. The other fairies realized the side effect of Michael's golden road and started to thank him for this gift. "More humans? Hooray! Maybe I'll taste the emotions of a Rebornian to see how they feel." "Me as well. Mr. Reborn, you wouldn't mind, right?" The fairies looked up at him in anticipation. "Before I answer that, how and why do you consume emotions from humans?" Vivi showed an exhausted expression. She was clearly impatient and wanted Michael's answer immediately. Unfortunately for her, Michael wasn't going to agree to something he didn't understand. "While you humans consume food to create energy, we fairies consume emotions, plain and simple," Vivi answered. "What happens to your targets? Do they lose anything? Does it hurt them?" "No," Vivi said. Even the other fairies immediately refuted Michael's assumption. "That would be barbaric. We're not monsters. We only consume emotions and nothing else. It doesn't hurt humans or else they would have hunted us down. They don't even know we consumed their emotions." Michael was very glad to hear that. These tiny and cute creatures would immediately turn into a horrifying monster in Michael's eyes if it turned out that they were somehow eating a part of a human's brain as they consumed their emotions. And according to ChatJK4, they were telling the truth. There is no recorded instance of a human getting hurt by a fairy's consumption of emotion. "So, this means that you won't disturb our construction work, right?" Vivi nodded. "Of course, Mr. Reborn. From now on, our fairies won't touch your people working in the forest." "Can you really make this decision without Virion?" The elderly fairy looked to be the leader of this whole village. It would be rude if she weren't aware of this new cooperation between them and Reborn. "Pshh," Vivi dismissed. "She's just an old fairy. We don't need her permission, right guys?" Michael wasn't inclined to believe Vivi, but the rest of the fairies nodded their heads to corroborate her words. "So, do we have a deal?" Vivi asked, flying over to Michael's hand to shake it prematurely. "Wait," he said, taking his hand back. "I have one more condition. You'll have to stop helping the bastard bandits." Upon hearing this, Vivi showed a look of complete and utter betrayal. She fell on her knees and despaired on the ground. "It's as if you're asking us to sever our arms and our wings. We can't do that," she said to Michael. "Why is it so important that you guys cooperate with the bandits?" "Fear," Vivi proclaimed. "The feeling of almost dying. The feeling of dread as a monster stalks behind you. Those are the feelings that give us most life. We cannot function without it, and the bandits give that feeling to travelers all the time. They're an easy way for us to eat sustenance." Even the rest of the fairies nodded their heads in agreement. They explained to Michael that fear was like meat for humans. It gave the most benefit to their physical bodies, making it essential to their everyday diet. Those that do not consume fear would find their strength and their magic slowly depleted over time. Now, this was a problem for Michael. At first, he thought that just any strong emotion would be enough for the fairies. But unfortunately, they needed to consume the feeling of near death, which only the bandits could give them freely. "We won't get rid of the bandits." No way," Vivi said, crossing her arms. "What if I built you a roller coaster?" Chapter 337, Roller Coaster. The prospect of the Golden Road wasn't enough for him to convince the fairies to change sides. Fear was just that important of a factor for them that they were willing to side with the most despicable of humans just so that they could get their daily fix of emotion. But thankfully, Michael knew that there was more than one way to evoke the fear of death in humans. One that wouldn't involve the bandits or any kind of fighting at all. It was a roller coaster ride. What's that? Vivi asked, tilting her head. Now, Michael knew that the concept of a roller coaster was completely foreign for people in this world. So he just simplified it for now. It's a carriage that will make people feel like they're falling off a cliff. They'll scream and shout without getting hurt at all. Vivi and the fairies all scratched their heads simultaneously. Huh? How do people not get hurt after falling off a cliff? Maybe it's secretly powered by a floating spell? Michael knew that a description was not enough, so he decided to borrow one of the skills of a Rebornian engineer. He raised his hand, with a magic circle appearing just above his palm. Michael pinched his head as if he was picking something up, and then threw that tit towards the air in front of him. Suddenly, a 3D light projection of a run-of-the-mill roller coaster appeared in front of the fairies, startling them all. Their wings buzzed as they flew away from the projection, thinking that it was some kind of light golem that Michael created. Vivi was the only one who remained and kept her eyes locked onto the rising and falling railings of the roller coaster. Since this was just a prototype of a roller coaster, Michael only added one falling and one rising section. Then, as he snapped his fingers, a cart appeared on the very bottom of the roller coaster, with a few human dummies seated firmly on the seats. Soon enough, the cart powered up and rose through the roller coaster in a 45-degree incline, slowly building up the tensions in the human dummies. And as they reached the top, the sound effects of metal creaking added to the anxious atmosphere from being this high up in the clouds. The cart curved through the plateau before it eventually reached the downward section of the roller coaster. There, at the very edge of the fall, the cart slowly slowed down, letting the human dummies see the fall in which they were just about to take. Then, when the tensions reached a crescendo, the cart raced down in almost a 90-degree angle, causing the dummy humans to raise their hands and let out a blood-curdling scream. Michael's projection of the roller coaster ride was so realistic that all the fairies in the area suddenly gathered right on top of the coaster without any of the fear they once exhibited. They subconsciously tried to consume the emotions of the human dummies, not realizing that they were just an illusion made by a gathering of light mana. The fairies were like sharks that smelled blood in the water. They subconsciously knew that the fear induced by this thing called the roller coaster would be equivalent or even better than the fear that they had consumed all this while. Vivi's eyes glinted with desire. From the first moment she heard the screams of the human dummies in the roller coaster, she already knew that she wanted to see this apparatus in real life. Mr. Reborn, can you make this roller coaster into reality? Pretty please. Although this was a very interesting idea that Michael would like to create, he knew that a project of this size and magnitude would require a lot of resources and manpower, which he didn't have much of. There was a lot of overlap of metal materials between this roller coaster and the automobile factory. Both needed a lot of specific and rare alloys to construct. Not only that, but the Golden Road needed a lot as well. Rebars were needed to ensure that the concrete would withstand the harsh conditions of the environment. If it was just a normal roller coaster, it would be easy. However, he knew that it wasn't just humans who were going to ride on it, but demi-humans as well. Many of them were far too heavy for a normal roller coaster, so he had to add more support to the roller coaster to ensure safety. All in all, a roller coaster for this world would cost far too much materials. If he were to start this project now, it would only exacerbate the problems they had in Reborn. I could build it, but it would take time. This will take a lot of materials to construct. Vivi suddenly flew up with her hands on her waist and her eyes filled with confidence. Why didn't you just say so? We have plenty of materials here in the forest. Really? This was a very pleasant surprise, one that would alleviate Michael of his worries even for a little bit. Where is it? Do you know a place with plenty of minerals? Yes, we do, Vivi replied, swiping her nose. The bandits are using it as their base camp. Once you give us a roller coaster, we'll allow you to use it instead. Michael couldn't help but smile. Then does that mean that you're going to stop helping the bandits? Thieves, Vivi declared. I want my roller coaster. Meanwhile, in the cave of the bastard bandits, the usual lively and raucous culture of these misfits of society became eerily quiet these days. After all, it had been a few weeks since they decided to attack the nation of Reborn. But not only have they failed in preventing their advance to the East Forest, but they had also been losing members left and right with no apparent evidence to where they went. The fairies would have loved to feast on these bandits with how much anxiety and fear they had these days. After all, a fiery woman was watching their every movement inside the cave. We lost another group? Blazelle grunted. How is Reborn doing this? Wayno sat quietly on the side, squirming, wondering if he should say something or not. We should stop sending out our forces and consolidate our men here, he muttered out. Shush, that's useless. We should attack them where they're the strongest. Gather more men to attack Reborn. The other bandits bowed at Blazelle before going out, leaving only the two of them inside. Have you found a way to communicate with the Pixie Queen? Blazelle asked. There's no way to do that. They don't communicate with humans. Wayno replied, trying to sound as respectful as possible. Tisk. Wayno took a peek at Blazelle. May I ask why you want to seek out the Pixie Queen? Will Flarecorp make an alliance with the fairies? Blazelle shook her head.
Heavens no.
The Pixie Queen has something that we need. And if you are able to get me a meeting with her, then I'll give you a first try at the relic we'll recover from her. What is it? It's a Godforge piece, Blazelle said with a smile on her face. Chapter 338. Small trip for the fairies. So, can we go see this roller coaster now? Vivi asked, buzzing excitedly around Michael's face. The other fairies who were also expectant of this roller coaster copied Vivi's actions and began to pester Michael. It's not that easy to create, you know. We have a lot of factors to take in before we even start planning its construction. First, we have to deal with the location. A roller coaster needs stable footing so that it won't crumble under its own weight. I have to take into account the speed rating. Michael's words entered one ear of the fairies and out the other. They were completely disinterested in hearing about the nitty-gritty details, nor could they understand his earth engineering concepts. Enough about that. Where will you build it? Vivi asked. Ideally, I want it in the nation of Reborn. This was actually one of the dilemmas Michael faced recently. After all, he wanted the roller coaster constructed in the wide spaces of the parched lands so that he could expand it more in the future. However, this project was mainly for the fairies. And in order to benefit from the fear induced by this ride, they would have to move all the way to the nation of Reborn to harvest emotions. Fairies couldn't just pack up and leave their forests so easily, especially if they had their own pocket dimension here. Oh, that's a good idea. I want to see the nation of Reborn too, Vivi said innocently. Me too. I want to see your stories in real life, Mr. Reborn. Michael didn't expect this response from them. He thought they would argue to have the roller coaster constructed in the forest. But what about this place? He asked them. Pesisich. Vivi snorted, waving off his concerns. It's not like we're leaving here. We'll just visit it for a few hundred years, no big deal. He looked at the other fairies, and they seemed to have the same sentiment as Vivi. He almost forgot that some demi-humans lived far longer than humans, with some even reaching 1,000-year lifespan. Come on, guys. Let's go visit Reborn. Vivi rallied, with the other fairies excitedly flying out of the village with no hesitation at all. Wait. That easily? They didn't even pack up their clothes or anything. It looked like they were just going on a stroll for a couple of minutes, when in reality, the nation of Reborn was thousands of kilometers away from here. Come on, let's go, Vivi said, pulling on Michael's cuff. He was the only left in the village, as the other fairies were already well on their way out of the forest. Won't Virion get mad at you for going away without permission? More than half of the fairy population suddenly deserted their village. He didn't want Virion to think that he abducted them or something. And if his guess was right and she was the Pixie Queen, then he especially didn't want to get on her bad side. Don't worry about Mom, Vivi said, pulling harder on his clothes. She's busy looking at ancient leaf scrolls for a while. She won't get out of the house for another month. This was a complete culture shock for Michael. Fairies' lives were so long that they treated a months-long journey as equivalent to just a quick stroll around the park. Even their reading sessions could go as long as an entire month. I guess it's fine. Of course it is, Vivi assured him. Now let's go to your nation. Michael led the fairies out of the forest. Once they were out of the pocket dimension, the fairies phased into reality as bright spots of light floating in the air. Vivi explained to him that fairies lost the ability to turn themselves invisible once they were outside the forest, but they could still shapeshift into a ball of light so that they could camouflage themselves in front of the sun's brightness. This led into a strange situation for Michael as he walked alongside 100 or so bright spherical spots of light that buzzed around like fireflies. Thankfully, though, they soon disappeared into the air and blended in with the sun as a camouflage, just like how the orcs hid in the shadows. He traveled back to the Golden Road project and told them that they could continue to work without problems. "Are you sure, boss?" asked the yellow Hobmanki on-site engineer. "What if those fairies harass us again?" Just then, a bright spot of light dropped from the skies and showed her true form to the Rebornians. "That won't happen again," Vivi said, her hands on her waist. "Whoa, boss! Who is she? Is she a fairy?" The Rebornians were surprised to see a fairy face to face. They only ever saw them on books or scrolls. "Yep, I am," Vivi said with pride. "Michael made a promise to us, so we won't harass you again. Nua." "Oh, I see. That makes sense. As expected of our boss. Then we shall proceed with the Golden Road immediately," said the on-site engineer. This time, the Rebornians weren't surprised. In fact, they already expected it. Michael tended to solve problems that others would oftentimes consider impossible. "Hey, you're the one in charge of this thing here, right? Can we see how you operate those automobiles?" Vivi pestered the Hobmanki engineer, flying across his face multiple times. Eventually, one of the drivers relented and got on the automobile and showed Vivi and the fairies how to drive. The poor lizardfolk driver almost crashed into a tree when almost 100 bright white lights entered his car, blinding him when he was driving it. "Oops. But we were just curious how these metal creatures work. Are you sure they're not living beings? They eat fuel, they move, and they even release droppings as smoke." That was not the first argument he'd heard about this. For most, her words made sense, which was part of the reason why a lot of people believed in the words of the Iron Maiden religion. "We need to learn how to drive if we want to get to the King's region," Vivi argued. The fairies had already found a way to drive, surprisingly. 10 fairies were on the pedals and another 10 were on the steering wheels. Michael doubted whether this would work, but he didn't want to find out. "There's no need for that," he said to them. "We can just teleport directly to the parched lands." Michael's shadow spread out around him, encompassing an entire 5-meter radius. With a simple twist of his wrist, Vivi and the rest of the fairies found themselves contained inside a large dome of pure darkness, even blacker than the night sky in their pocket dimension. A moment after that, the shadows rescinded back into Michael's feet, revealing a completely different environment for Vivi and the fairies. The dense and green forestry of the east was suddenly replaced by these towering metal buildings around them. And in front of them, they saw the road where automobile cars were riding left and right. Humans and demi-humans in formal and casual attire walked along the streets, waiting for the light on the curb to turn green so they could cross. As far as the fairies were concerned, this was an alien world. Chapter 339. Considerations for the coaster. What just happened? Whoa! We teleported. The fairies buzzed around excitedly as they looked around this new scenery. This concrete jungle was even weirder to them than the strange world of their pocket dimensions full of glowing trees and tentacle grasses. Ho-ho! Mass teleportation. I would have wanted to use the automobile, but this is good as well, Vivi remarked. Just then, an older yellow Hobmanki gentleman approached the fairies and welcomed them with a warm smile. His simple red robe and his disarming demeanor made the fairies feel welcomed by his very presence. This was Lolo, the mayor of the nation of Reborn. "Good morning to you all. I am Lolo, your humble and personal servant in your visit to the nation of Reborn. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any needs or concerns. Most guests feel overwhelmed when they first enter our nation. So we have designated employees spread all around the corners of the streets. They're the ones wearing a bright orange robe and a sash over their shoulders. Feel free to ask them as well. The fairy's eyes start to dart around the area. All around, they could smell the scent of overwhelming emotions. Just behind them in a little building, there were humans and demi-humans exhibiting pure joy and contentment as they ate a triangular piece of bread with melting cheese on top. On the opposite side of the street, they could sense people experiencing comfort as they slept soundly in cool winter-like rooms in the middle of summer. In the Lamia district just a few blocks from here, the sounds of water splashing and children cheering resounded out clearly as they swam in the man-made rivers for the Lamias. And most of all, the feeling of tense excitement permeated through the air and reached the fairy's nose. They traced it out to the baseball stadium on the outskirts of the nation, where a high-stakes game was playing between two rival teams, the Dwarves and the Rebornians. What's that? What's that? What are they all doing? I never knew emotions could be this varied. Oh my pixie! So many emotions. Even Vivi was overwhelmed with all the new emotions she was sensing throughout the parched lands. It was an all-you-can-eat buffet of new and exotic emotions that they have never even thought was possible to eat. Usually, emotions like surprise and contentment were too weak for them to consume. But somehow, the nation of Reborn was able to enhance it by at least 10 times the normal amount. Shall I personally escort you all to a tour of the nation? Lolo asked. Really? That would be great, Vivi exclaimed. Michael thought it was a great idea as well. He had a lot of things to figure out first before they started the roller coaster project, so this would be a good pastime for the fairies while he was out. He just hoped that the fairies wouldn't make too much trouble while he was out. Then I'll leave the fairies to you, Lolo. You can count on me, boss. I shall endeavor to make the fairies feel like they are home, the reliable mayor replied. What are you worried about, Mr. Reborn? We'll behave. They won't even know that we ate their emotions, Vivi argued. That was exactly what Michael was worried about. Just ask for their permission first. Also, you can't scare them or anything. Just consume what emotion they already have. Don't create new ones, he reminded her. Yes, yes, Vivi answered half-heartedly, making Michael unsure if she would do as she said. I shall make sure that those affected are well compensated by the nation, Lolo added, making Michael more confident about leaving the fairies alone. Good, thanks Lolo. I'll leave you in charge of them while I go out and prepare. Michael wasn't even finished talking when the fairies already spread out like butterflies all over the nation. People would be surprised by the sudden appearance of these exotic fairies, who were thought to be only legends made by fiction, which further increased the reputation of the nation of Reborn as a paradise that even fairies would visit. While the fairies were off to a vacation or a buffet, Michael went back to their headquarters in Angora City. He sought out Kong, the chief engineer of the nation, to ask for his help on constructing the roller coaster. He was the one most familiar with the different specifications needed for demi-human constructions. After all, he was in charge in demi-human-specific architecture for the different districts of the nation. For example, lizard men don't pair well with human-made construction. Their beds had to be enclosed in a dark and moist space that would emulate a rock they used to live in under back in the woods. Not only that, but they couldn't sit down properly in a human-made chair because their tails would get in the way. They would be uncomfortable riding in a normal roller coaster, even if it's just for a minute. He also had to consider the giraffe folk, who had enlarged necks and would be at risk of decapitation if the coaster had twists and turns. Conversely, there were rat folks who were far too small to be secured in place by a normal belt in a roller coaster. So, he had to make new security features for them. Another thing that he had to consider was the ride itself. For humans and other simple demi-humans, a normal drop of a roller coaster would be enough to induce fear inside them. However, for warriors and people in a higher realm, this may not be necessarily enough to scare them. I'll send you the blueprints of the roller coaster now, Michael said as he flicked a point of light gathering at his fingertips. ChatJK4 created an easy guide on how the engineering of a roller coaster worked. And with Kong's talent, he easily understood the mechanism in just a few seconds. "What do you think?" he asked Kong. The yellow Hobmanki engineer closed his eyes and began to calculate everything in his mind. It's a very interesting ride, boss. I can see how this will become another attraction for the nation. As for the safety features for the different demi-humans, I think that it will be easy enough to construct and engineer. It will just need more resources to complete." Kong used his blueprint projection skill to create a few rudimentary sketches of the roller coaster chair with new additions to accommodate the different body types of demi-humans. "I'm also thinking about creating another roller coaster, but this one is more intense and extreme. I want something that will scare even the Dragonborns. Since there was magic in this world, the features on a roller coaster ride could become more creative and more deadly than the ones in his previous world. And in a sense, it was even safer as well. But boss, we don't have enough resources to build one, much less two." Kong was right. The one problem they had right now was a lack of materials to build. There were plenty of ongoing projects in Reborn that they could not afford another big one such as this. Chapter 340, Future Solution. Michael sighed. The expansion of the nation of Reborn truly was only hindered by their lack of resources. "We could slow down the renovation of Angora City to free up some materials," Kong suggested. Since Angora City was now practically under the nation of Reborn, thanks to the Duke spending all his time there, Michael decided to go all out in improving their quality of life into Reborn standards. The only problem was that it was already taking in a lot of materials even though it was only in its early stages of development. For example, the plumbing and sewer system project was only 9% finished even though they had already spent a few months on its construction. It was like a bottomless pit in the way that it consumed materials. "No. Keep the construction as it is," he replied. "We should consolidate our influence in Angora City before the Golden Road is spread further in the Queen's region. For now, I want you to create a team to start planning the roller coaster. I'll deal with the resources problem," he said to Kong. "As you wish, boss. Who shall I take with me?" The department Rebornian engineers had about 900 members in its midst, most of whom were already busy with their own projects. Of those 900, only about 50 of them were senior-level engineers who Kong and Michael trusted that could take control of a project all on their own. 30 of them oversaw the numerous factories back in the Parched Lands and the projects in the King's region, while 20 were in charge of the different sub-projects in the Queen's region, 10 in Angora City, 5 in the Grafted Cluster, and another 5 in the Golden Road. I would need at least 5 senior-level engineers and 10 junior-level engineers to complete this task, boss. Take them from the factories. They don't need active supervision from senior-level engineers." "As you wish," Kong replied. Michael used his shadow transportation skill to teleport himself to the Grafted Cluster, where the new Reborn mines were working day and night to support Michael with 5,000 tons of materials every day. Unfortunately, that wasn't nearly enough to go around these days. He just hoped that Priya, the Lamia in charge of the mines, had some good news for him. "Welcome, boss. Is there a problem?" Same old, Michael replied. "My forever hungry company needs more sustenance to grow." Thankfully, though, Priya evolved to become a very specific type of Lamia that could grow her own minerals and resources extracted from deep underground as if they were just normal crops. As far as Michael knew, she was the first of her kind, so the exact parameters of her new power was still unknown. "All our machines are working as well as we hoped, boss. We will reach our monthly quota a week in advance, but that will only net us a few hundreds of tons more per day," Priya replied as she led Michael through the railroad in the mines, where hard-working men used their spells and skills to extract raw ores from the ground. The men saluted at Michael with their grease-stained faces before throwing their ores to a mine cart. He smiled back at them and thanked them for their hard work. "How about your little project?" he asked Priya. The Lamia engineer led Michael to a private tunnel that only she could access. It led to a relatively large chamber filled with rectangular plots of ruffled ground arranged to resemble a farm. But instead of soil, Priya used a mixture of powdered granite and stone. And instead of seeds, Priya used small crystals of raw ores that sprouted out of the ground. I experimented a lot on which ground the ores flourished under. The data suggests that using rocks that it's extracted from is best used to make the ore grow. I also need to make sure to replenish the room with all 8 manas for it to grow. Michael squatted down and looked at the small rock of iron growing on the ground. Using his supreme talent, he saw the ore glow as the ore sucked out all the mana from the air and used it to create its own body. And as he looked around some more, one thing immediately caught his eye. On the very edge of the mineral farm, he saw a tiny glint of yellow light jutting out from the ground. Even from far away, Michael realized that it was, indeed, actually gold. He walked towards it and saw 3 more single crops beside it. These were silver, lead, and copper. Somehow, Priya was able to grow minerals that were not even found in this mine at all. "What are these?" he asked her. "Oh, that's just a little experiment that I had done," she replied. "I didn't think that it would work, but surprisingly, I was able to make them grow just as well as iron ores." Michael stayed silent for a few seconds, realizing the potential of Priya's discovery. "How long do you think before you can harvest all these crops?" "For normal resources like iron, it will take a few months at the least. But for those exotic materials like gold, probably more," she replied, a bit ashamedly. "I apologize, boss. It's not enough to help with our problem." "What are you saying? You already helped out a lot. Just continue working hard on this. I give you my full support." Priya gleamed with joy. "Thank you, boss." Although Michael wasn't able to find a solution in the mines, he was glad to find out that Priya's little experiments could help the nation in many other ways. Growing gold was like growing money. It would only take time before she was able to grow enough resources to alleviate the scarcity of materials in Reborn, as well as give it another form of revenue. Finding no solution, Michael decided to take a little break and eat some McTony's chicken. He teleported himself to the truck stop and found himself standing in front of the restaurant that was already filled to the brim with customers. It seemed that the customer base for the restaurant had grown even larger during his absence. Usually, there weren't many people visiting the truck stop during the middle of the day aside from those wanting to refuel. Most wanted to travel while the sun was out. But now, there were definitely more people deciding to spend precious daylight to eat some McTony's. Walking inside, the spicy and exotic scent of the dragon's whiskers entered his nose, giving him more longing for the famous chicken recipe. However, his appetite for eating was lessened as soon as he saw how crowded the place was. Most people were standing all around the occupied tables as they waited for their turn to eat. He could see people becoming uncomfortable as they sat on their table and ate chicken. Who wouldn't? There would be 10 other people standing near them, making them feel claustrophobic. But what were they supposed to do? The only way they could eat chicken was if they waited 30 minutes to an hour for their turn to order chicken.